Just announce in a second when we're live.
Excellent.
And we are live.
All right. Thanks very much, Andy. Hello, everyone. It's 7 o'clock and welcome to the Newburyport Zoning Board of Appeals meeting for March 9th, 2021 via Zoom. I'm Mark Moore, Vice Chair, calling the meeting to order as our esteemed Chair Rob Ciampetti can't be here tonight. As always, we have City Planning Director Andy Port driving the presentation visuals and managing participation of attendees, with City Planner Caitlin Sullivan poised in the wings. Before I start, I always want to recognize our note taker, Gretchen Joy, for all her dedicated efforts. I'll start with the roll call to ensure that we have proper quorum tonight. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm Mark Moore, Vice Chair, obviously in attendance, and Rob Ciampetti is absent tonight. I will introduce each member and ask that they respond with here, starting with Secretary Stephen Delisle. Of course, reminding everyone to unmute.
Thank you. Here.
You're welcome. I've done it myself. Member Rachel Webb.
Here.
Member Ken Swanton.
Here.
Associate Member Walter Jagnan.
Here.
Associate Member Greg Bannock.
Here.
Excellent. Finding 6 members present, we have a quorum and will proceed with the meeting. As our chair is absent tonight, Mr. Jagnan will be the voting member, the other voting member for this meeting. For those new to the Zoning Board of Appeals meetings and or new to this Zoom format, we find it helpful to describe the format of the meeting and how it flows. With the roll call completed, we will soon move to public hearings. I'll start by reading a description of the public notice to identify the application to be presented. I will then ask the applicant to present their case, for lack of a better word. And it's often the applicant's legal counsel or the applicant's architect that will present and describe the proposed changes to the property. Once the presentation is complete, we then move on to one of the reasons for these meetings, although virtual now, that they're called public hearings. We're looking for public comment. Moving into the public comment portion of the hearing entails asking any resident attendee who wishes to comment to come forward and be heard. It's vital to making these public hearings a robust exchange of thoughts and ideas. I'll ask anyone in virtual attendance who wishes to come forward and be heard tonight to raise their hand electronically utilizing the raise hand icon at the bottom of their screen. Hopefully after a year of Zoom meetings, we're all familiar with that. Andy Port or I will announce those that are recognized to speak. Please remember to unmute yourself before you start, as I have occasionally forgotten to do this myself, and it makes for a really awkward silence. Before starting the comment, we also ask that you provide your name and address clearly for the record. Please try to keep your comments succinct and to the point so that others who wish to comment can do so efficiently. Now, please allow me a little soapbox moment. Recently, I have noticed a trend during public comment that I wanted to address tonight. Public comment portion of the hearing should consist of comments either in favor, opposed, or to offer general comments or specific concerns. Recent meetings, however, some of which I have chaired, have gone down the slippery slope of direct Q&A between residents and the applicant. The chair finds this inappropriate and inefficient, as it's the board's charge to follow public comments by engaging the applicants with questions related to their proposal. The board has completed careful preparation prior to these meetings, listened to the applicant's public presentation, and lastly, hears comments from the residents. While the board certainly values and encourages residents' thoughtful participation, I'm of the opinion that these virtual meetings often stretch late, in part due to the inefficiencies of the Zoom format, and in part due to a Q&A session that is outside the regular public hearing format, sometimes for the purpose of eliciting information publicly available prior to the hearing. I would ask participants to please keep comments brief, and of course, feel free to state questions you have for the record, but allow the board to fulfill their role in eliciting additional detail in the questions from the board portion of the hearing. And I thank you for your understanding. We do proceed with public comment until all raised hands are exhausted and all those who wish to be heard are heard. Once all public comments have been heard, that portion of the hearing is closed and we move on to the aforementioned questions from the board. The board, often inspired by public comments, will then question the applicant or the applicant's representatives to draw out additional detail needed in the decision-making process. Once the board has exhausted their questioning, I will close that portion of the hearing and move on to deliberations. The deliberations in a public forum is another cornerstone of the public hearing format. Everything the board discusses about the application is done in public or virtual public, so that all in attendance get to hear the thought processes and discussions of each member and of the board as a whole as it moves towards its collective decision. During that process, it sometimes becomes evidence that the board feels it needs more information or that the board is leaning in opposition for one reason or another. The board can then move to continue the application until it can obtain the desired information. Or if a denial of the application is looking like a possible outcome, the board often gives the applicant the opportunity to request a continuance to address the board's concerns at a future date in a future public hearing before the deliberations close and the board proceeds to a formal vote, which would then have consequences for the applicant with respect to timing and cost going forward. Once deliberations are complete, excuse me, and no continuance has been requested, we'll then seek a motion from the board, and when seconded, we'll call for a vote on the motion. Because we use Robert's Rules of Order, you will hear a motion on the application made in the affirmative or to approve, even if the board member making the motion plans to deny. With 4 votes in the affirmative, an application is approved. I will then close that application and move on to the next hearing on the agenda, applying all the same rules. When all the applications on the agenda are heard and addressed, I will close public hearings portion, and the board will move into a business meeting to approve the minutes from our last meeting and to address any other items appropriate for that forum. All right, I've called the roll, we have a quorum, and I'm off my soapbox, so let's move forward with the public hearings. Before we move with our first item on the agenda, of course, there's a curveball in here. With the board's permission, because we have at our last item tonight on the agenda is a request for a continuance, I would just like to address 9 Woodland Street. I believe the applicant has asked for a continuance to the 3/23 meeting, and would kind of like to knock this off before we go back to the top of the agenda. So that said, 2021-10 variance for 9 Woodland Street. Is an applicant here that wishes to be heard on this? Okay, hearing none.
Yep, I'm here. Sorry.
Oh, we are. Okay,
I was
here we
just-
go.
This is Chris Oth here. Good evening.
Good evening.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I was here and I am requesting a continuance. Waiting to hear back from my architect on kind of the best course of action. But thanks for reviewing my application.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Arthur. Yeah, I just didn't want anyone that might be here that wasn't aware that you were looking for a continuance to be hanging around to the end of the meeting here. So with that
Yep,
said,
appreciate that.
we have a request for continuance to the 3/23 meeting. Do we have a motion?
This is Ken Swanton. I'll make the motion. I move that we continue the variance application for 9 Woodland Street, file 2021-10 to the March 23rd, 21 meeting.
I'll second it, Rachel Webb.
Okay, we have a motion made by Mr. Swanton, seconded by Ms. Webb to continue this matter to 3/23 meeting. I'll now take the vote. Mr. Delisle.
Yeah.
I heard that. Ms. Webb,
Yes,
Mr. Swanton,
Yes.
Mr. Chagnon,
Yes.
and Mr. Moore says yes. All in the affirmative. This application is continued to 3/23. And thank you. Okay, now back to the top. Top of the agenda now is Caswell Development, care of Lisa Mead, Mead Telemann, and cost of 27 Hancock Street and also 2125 Hancock Street. We have addressed these together in the past. It is for 2021-02, -03, and -04. Special permit for nonconformities to renovate and add to an existing home is the 02. 04, special permit to allow a 2-family home, and 03 is to also allow a 2-family home. For a little recap or summary of the development, the properties are located in the R2 zoning district. The properties were adjacent to the rail trail on the south end. The applicant at the last meeting described the complete nature of the development. There were some concerns voiced with the size of the buildings, the landscape plans were incomplete, et cetera. And there was continuance made to tonight's meeting. So with that said, might we hear from the applicant?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Lisa Mead, Mead Telemann, Costa 30 Green Street in Newburyport on behalf of Caswell Development. And with me here this evening is Jake Caswell, the manager of Caswell Development, and Eileen Graff, who is the architect on the project. As the chair suggested, we were here at the last meeting, and for 21 to 25 Hancock Street, we seek a special permit for use only. And at 27 Hancock Street, we seek a special permit for use and a special permit to modify pre-existing non-conforming structure. At the last hearing, and I would like to kind of correct one thing that maybe that was said by the chair. We didn't necessarily have an incomplete landscape plan. This board doesn't require landscape plans, but the board wanted to see more landscaping given what was being presented. And so the applicant, given the nature of the project next to the rail trail, agreed to go back and do that. Additionally, the applicant heard the comments from the board regarding the length of the structure, in particular at 21 to 25 Hancock Street. Now Eileen's going to talk a little bit about that in a minute. I do want to point out that the applicant, if you go to the next slide, Andy, the applicant also immediately after the last meeting met with the chair of the Parks Commission, the manager of the city parks, the project manager for the rail trail, and the head of the tree commission, all in order to consolidate their comments on the landscaping plan. All of those comments have been included in the landscaping plan that Eileen's going to go over in a minute. And they have all approved the landscaping plan. The one caveat is that Jordy Vining wants to see before this is all finalized, specifically with the planning board, that the sizes of the various plants be incorporated into the plan, notwithstanding what's been represented. So before we go through these details that you have here, we're going to actually slide down to slide 7, please. And I'm going to turn it over to Eileen, and she can talk a little bit about the changes that have been made.
Thank you, Lisa. Good evening, Mr. Chair and members of the board. If actually, well, this were, I'll leave it at the site plan. I was going to say we could switch to the landscape plan, but this is representative of where some of our design efforts have been since we were last in front of you. And if we look to the left, that's 2125 Hancock first. We really focused the design effort to address the concerns about length. And one of the first moves we did was detached the lower unit, the corner closest to the church, say in the northern corner, to help detach and give some air and some light between the buildings. It was pushed towards the back of the property line. So now you could see that 26.4 in dimension off the left property line. And that was helping to just alleviate and lessen the sort of length of that building. We squeezed where we could in other areas. And in the end, we were able to reduce the length from the original 123, and it is now down to 93 feet in length from Hancock Street down towards Levitt Court, to the bottom of Levitt Court. Then on 27 Hancock, likewise, in an effort to address some of the length, we were able to squeeze it down from, instead of 116 in linear feet, it's now 113. There were a little bit more challenges with this. We have the historic structure there, which became part of the discussion at our last meeting. And we spent some time focusing on that original structure. We wanted to expose it a little bit more. You will see a change in how the building connects to the original structure, more of it being exposed, say, on the northeastern side. So that now we have also, on the second level, removed any concern there was about roof line change. That was sort of another discussion happening within the regarding the historic structure. So now The second floor plan no longer connects on that upper level from the front of the house to which is the new construction, to the original structure. And there's an internal stair instead that connects to that upper level space. Therefore, again, removing the question that anything is happening to the original structure. All four walls of the original structure will remain, as well as all of the roof rafters. And then the two structures to the top and to the bottom are gently attaching on the sides. And then actually, if we switch to floor plan, this might be better demonstrated in A01. Andy, if we could.
I
Did you
think that
say
might,
A01?
Lost Andy. A01, if you could. It should be the first floor plan for
Ah, yes.
27.
Yep. It's a little further down. Got it.
Okay, great. Thank you. So again, this is the first floor plan of 27 Hancock, and you can see where in the bottom of the page where I've defined the existing structure. What I want to note is that we made design efforts again to try to expose more of the original structure. The yellow, the unit below the blue, or it's the left of the blue, is now pushed back, and you can see the dimension line there of 12 feet, so that along that length on the left side, we have more of the structure showing. And likewise, we did the same on the right side of that original structure, and now it's exposing 5 feet. If you now switch to A02, you could see it at the second level and how it attaches. And one thing I want to comment on is that where that 12-foot dimension line was on the left, I just want to point out that now on the second floor, since we are abutting on the left side with just a 1.5-story structure, a lot more of the second floor of the original structure or second floor wall is exposed. And so on the first floor, it was 12 feet that was exposed. And on the second floor, it's as long, sorry that the dimension line was not put there, but I have it as a reference. It's 17 feet on that left side. So again, more of the second story of that wall is exposed. And on the right side now, likewise with the gable end connecting to the structure, as it creeps away, it's now 8 feet in length that is exposed to the Hancock Street elevation, and trying to really sort of let that original structure stay as pure on the gable end as possible. Both the short ends are not interrupted in any way of any structure and such. So those have and remain untouched or non-attached to. And so then actually, if we could shift to, sorry, before we leave this, I'll comment back to the second floor plan again. As you can see, it's called out as a loft. This space will be accessed strictly by an internal stair within the original structure, and that can serve for the house as some overflow space, whether it's a rec room or an office, etc. But we no longer are making a connection from where you can see the laundry abuts it and a closet. We have eliminated any form of connection there. So again, all of the roof rafters remain intact, and there is no change in the roof line. Simply overlaying the rafters that you see in that diagonal and the triangle shapes, that's an overlay of some roof connection. And then now if we could switch to the landscape plan, Andy.
that's 8 maybe, Andy.
Great. You're fast, Andy. All right. So as Lisa had mentioned, we've worked with the city and with neighbors to come up with this landscape plan and to address everybody's concerns. To start with, we have the 5 trees that line Hancock Street, and 5 pretty significant trees. There's yellowwood there, elm, tulip tree, One comment Kim Turner had made is that those tulip trees were something they were really trying to bring back more of in the city. So those 5 will line Hancock Street. The applicant Jay is willing and to place these on his property in order to have more success in their growth and then lessen the damage that they could cause, say, in the sidewalks and such. So now they have nice, comfortable room to grow. Along with that is prior to that is the removal of 2 existing Norway maples that are on the sort of southern side of the property, closer to 20, right in front of 27 and closer to 29 Hancock. And those will be removed in order for these trees to get placed, but also in an effort to improve the sidewalks. So they will be removing, resetting the granite curbing that exists, as likewise will be installing brick sidewalk for the length of in front of these properties, 21 all the way to 27. Then as you turn the corner on the rail trail side, this is where a significant amount of the plantings is happening. There's some more significant trees proposed in there, maple, yellowwood, and then on the northernmost corner are the spruce. But they have, that's the higher level of plantings, and on the lower level, there's an assortment of rhodies, of winterberry, viburnum, and that has been placed in sort of a double layer effect to try to, again, meeting everybody's concerns and needs for that proper abutting property and how the rail trail is experienced. Jay has agreed to remove any of the invasive plantings that currently exist, and after all these plantings are done, that area will be mulched in their beds. As you can see on the right side of the property, to address some concerns of the neighbor, as we had mentioned last time, you'll see the arborvitae lining the fence line there, the 6-foot privacy fence, as well as some larger tree on that side, a katsura tree, and then heading down to the driveway that with the removal of the existing street tree, we are now able to give more garden zone to allow for a row of boxwood or holly along that edge, just to give some definition between the 2 properties and the 2 driveways. So that is the landscape plan. And then if we could scroll to maybe the first of the renderings, Andy.
So I think they follow a photograph, perhaps, Andy, that would be towards the end.
Great. And so here it sort of pulls everything together, the architecture, the landscape, trying to give you a better feel for what the changes will be in the neighborhood. And as you can see here, it's the beginnings of these street trees along Hancock. And likewise, going down that split rail fence is the experience going down towards the rail trail. And you can see the different heights and different levels. And also there was attention to different seasonal plantings as well. And then if we go to the next rendering, a little closer on that same corner, again, looking more down towards 27, but following along Hancock. And so you could, again, follow the sidewalk, the brick sidewalk would be all cleaned up. And then you could see the opening to the introduced formalized Levitt Court. And then the next rendering. This is from the rail trail side. It's a little bit deceptive because it's kind of elevated in its view, but trying to give more perspective to more of the property. You could see glimmers of 27 on the left-hand side. And then again, the detached garage, which is behind these spruce trees. And then as you travel up towards Hancock, the continuation of unit C and D and C following up the trail. And then lastly, this is the view from Hancock Street looking towards the rail trail and mostly in front of 27. And you could see glimmers of the changes that happen on 21, 25 by detaching the garage and being able to push it back. It helps to reduce the sort of overall scale of the building in that view. But I think that using these renderings is a way to sort of show how the combination of these architectural footprint changes in combination with the landscape plan has helped to create a residential addition in this rather empty or void corner. I see it as something that brings more texture to the street, that sort of completes this empty corner. And I think that that these changes and the landscape plan proposed are all such nice details to what seems to be a rather empty and unmanaged lot at the moment. So thank you to drive that home, that all of this will be improved and helping support the sort of neighborhood feel and texture of the South End. So that's all I have for comments on the architectural changes, but I'm happy to answer any questions as they come along, and I can pass it back to Lisa now.
Thank you very much. Andy, if you could go back up to the site plan, please. I think that's slide 7, maybe 6 or 7.
Yeah, do you want the landscape plan or the site plan?
The landscape plan's fine. You can hold it here because I think there is some evidence of what I'm going to talk about. So thank you very much, Eileen. I think that was really helpful, and obviously a lot of work has happened in the last couple of weeks. I would just like to point out to the board that a lot of these plantings at the request of the city are happening on city property, and the cleanup of the city property obviously benefits the property owners here, but wouldn't necessarily otherwise occur. I venture to say that there's not many, if any, other places along the rail trail where the adjacent property owner has done so many plantings and the cleanup as well. So I think that the cooperative effort between all of those folks related to the rail trail and the Parks Commission and the applicant is really evident in these plans, which neither party would have had to participate in. I would also be remiss if I didn't point out that to the board that the current lot coverage at 21 to 25 from the non-conforming building, which you can kind of see outlined in the background there, is 22.3%, and the proposed lot coverage is 22.5%. So the required lot coverage is no more than 25. So there's just a teeny bit of increased lot coverage. But importantly, the current open space is 46.7%, where a minimum of 40% is required. That's because much of this lot, 21 to 25 in particular, is covered by hot top, not Levitt Court, but other hot top given its prior use. The open space for this lot goes up to 67% with this proposal. And I think that's a really important factor. The cleanup that's going to occur on this property as part of the change of use is really important to point out. As to 27 Hancock, again, I think it's important to point out the changes that were made. The landscaping now added here is important and was necessary to be shown. We've got sign-offs from the City Tree Commission as well as the DPW related to the sidewalk. And I think that is important as well. The current lot coverage on this lot is 5%, but no other lot in this district has 5% lot coverage. In fact, that's an aberration in Hancock Street or anywhere around here to have 5% lot coverage. What's being proposed is actually much more consistent with the neighborhood generally. And if you could go to slide 4, please. And I included these. I'm just going to kind of slide through these because I think this question came up at the last meeting. So we're asking for a 2-family use on both of these lots. And then of course on 27, we're asking for a modification to pre-existing non-conforming structure. And there was a question that arose relative to essentially what's the density in the rest of this area. And so I'm just going to point out a couple of things on here. The other two family uses, so keep in mind, both of these lots include over 16,000 square feet of area, and they're going to have a two family use. So at 1 to 1.5 Hancock, there's 2 units on there. It's 5,619 square feet. At 6 Hancock, there's 2 units, 6,390 square feet. At 7 to 9 Hancock, there's 2 units at 2,970 square feet. At 10 Hancock, 2 units, 7,433 square feet. 11 Hancock, 2 units, 4,624 square feet. At 8 Lunt Street, 2 units, 5,440 square feet. 28 Hancock, 2 units, 5,440 square feet. 36 to 42 Madison, that's on the corner, that's a multifamily, 8,790 square feet. 40 Marlboro, 2 units, 11,380. And of course, as you get towards Marlboro, the lots get a little bit bigger, but still undersized compared to A, the requirement, and B, what our lots have. So I go through that, and we provided a lot of information here, but the basic information is that these 2 units actually meet the dimensional requirements, but for the front yard setback, which is existing off of Levitt Court, than the rest of the lots in the neighborhood. And so it is actually conforming, whereas everything else is non-conforming and certainly is not overly dense. So we would ask that since the last meeting, we've provided to the board how lot 21 to 25 meets the 2 family use. That's the only thing we're here for on 21 to 25 is a request to allow a 2 family use on that property. And we went through the special permit criteria at the last meeting, and I believe that the applicant has satisfied that criteria, and happy to run through it again. And on 27, we asked the board to approve the 2 family use again on that lot, as well as modifying the pre-existing non-conforming structure as proposed. I remind the board that almost every neighbor spoke in favor of this project. I asked the board to consider a number of conditions which now are represented on these plans, and deference to the neighbor immediately at 29 Hancock Street. I'm happy to repeat those again if the board needs them. And so I would ask the board approve what I would think that most people in the South End, and certainly the people in the neighborhood, believe to be something that's an improvement to this area and certainly consistent with the rest of the district and neighborhood. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Attorney Mead, and thank you, Ms. Graff, for that that update and thorough show of plans. With that done, now we're going to turn to public comment now. And again, I'm going to remind everyone to raise your hand electronically and wait to be recognized by Andy Port. And don't forget to unmute yourself once you're called and state your name and address, please.
Okay, first person we have is Tom Coulterjohn. You'll have to unmute on your end as well. Are you there, Tom? Tom, can you hear us?
Looks like his mic is
Yeah, it looks like his mic's connected, but
open.
I don't see
Nothing happening.
sound. Tom, we can't hear anything from you. I don't know if there's anyone else that is interested in raising their hand. We can circle back. Okay, I'm gonna move to Kim Quint for a moment.
Okay.
There we go. Great. Again, as with the meeting 2 weeks ago, this is Rob Jorgensen, the co-owner with Kim Quint at 70 Purchase Street. We're abutters on Purchase Street. Can you
Go right
folks hear me?
Yep,
Yes,
go right
thank
ahead.
you for
Okay,
thank you for
perfect. Thank you.
clarifying. Yeah.
Sorry. This is still new to me, this Zoom stuff. Last time I talked about the concerns of not just ourselves, but I think I mentioned starting to reach out to Purchase Street abutters, and the concerns for the stormwater management, those concerns still continue with us all. Tonight, though, I want to speak more to my personal concern for the scale of these structures, which has been talked about extensively now. And one thing that was just mentioned is that I think in the closing a minute ago, that the neighbors are largely in favor of this project. Well, I don't think anyone on Purchase Street has been reached out to. So nothing's been communicated with us other than the invite to join these. So for what it's worth, I largely appreciate the effort that's been put into trying to address these scale issues. I understand they're terribly difficult. What's not coming through in the current round of drawings is that by separating the garage from the C and D units, that's never illustrated on any of the elevation drawings that have been presented. So it's hard to gauge what the overall takeaway would be visually by separating that garage. You still have a large, essentially one single structure. Yes, you've got some airspace in there. It's minimal. I'm guessing by eyeballing plans and elevations, maybe 5 feet. So it's a minimal space. Yes, it's something. But the scale, the size of these units are still very self-evident. They mathematically work by the numbers, but the spirit of these structures, not much has been really discussed about that. And some of the things I'd like to talk about are the fact that you've got essentially still the same dynamic at work. You have two long structures that feed off each other's scale and visual vocabulary to reinforce anything positive about one or the other, and also the negative. So if there is an issue with scale, which I contend there is still, by having two of these things really becomes sort of otherworldly. I can't think of another occurrence in this end of town where this sort of mirrored thing is going on. And I think that's part of the issue. Then another thing, just some side notes. The architectural illustrations, the other thing that's missing here is there are no human beings drawn in for reference for scale. And I would submit that if they were included at this stage of the game, it would really help illustrate the scale problem at hand. So let me leave it at that. Essentially, the design concerns that I have, along with the continued reservations for the stormwater plans, I think one gentleman last week said, just take a look at the, in so many words, take a look at the storm drains where the rail trail, which is a heavily studied, planned, blah, blah, blah project, where that crosses Purchase Street, those drains don't work most of the time. And we're not even talking about draining that large an area. So if we have, anyway, the drainage issues remain a concern. The scale issue is obviously ongoing, in my opinion. And as such, I oppose to the approval of the special permits in question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Jorgensen, for the.
Actually, excuse me, I forgot one point.
Yep.
This indeed is a precedent-setting decision. I believe Lisa mentioned last week, yes, there are large parcels remaining in the south end, Purchase Street included. And I beg that this be considered carefully. Thank you.
Thank you again.
Thanks.
All right, anyone who's next on the list?
Yeah, Tom, are you with us?
Yes, can you hear me?
We
Yes.
can.
Oh, great.
Go
Thank
right
you.
ahead.
Tom Coulter John, 64 Federal Street, co-president of the Newburyport Preservation Trust. The trust still opposes this project. They have only made minor changes on this massive project. Frankly, it's disappointing. The historic building at 27 Hancock is still obliterated. It is no longer recognizable. 27 Hancock was a typical house on the street, and now it's gone. You see a tiny bump out from that original house if you walk down Hancock. The project overall is still. Hello? Hello?
Go right ahead. Someone needs to be
The
on mute.
project overall is still too massive for the street and doesn't fit in with the historic neighborhood. Separating out one set of garages and shortening the other long building by 3 feet does not go far enough. It is a token gesture. This project still needs some serious changes. This project should strive for more cohesiveness, not isolation. This project sort of faces itself and sort of isolates itself from Hancock. By creating a more densely used court, it creates a new identity cut off from the existing neighborhood. I think that's a terrible idea. We need more good, cohesive neighborhoods. It needs a more consistent architectural theme that is in harmony with the historic architecture on Hancock. This project bears no resemblance to what has been on this street and is a detriment to the neighborhood. It is much too long. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Coulter-John. Who do we have next that wishes to be heard?
Next person is Stephanie Nikitich.
Okay, go ahead, Ms. Nikitich.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Stephanie Nikitich, 93 High Street. I just will agree with Mr. Jorgensen and Mr. Coulter-John. I think both of their comments were useful and correct. And just to note that the applicant has said this is only a special permit for use, as though you don't have any other decisions that you can make in such an application, but in fact you do, and I think you're already aware of them. They were discussed at your last hearing. And I hope, because also this requires major site plan review, that you might wait to hear what your colleagues on the planning board think about this before you make your own decision. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We still have a hand raised, it looks like.
Next person is John Growitz.
Hi, thank you. John Growitz, 149 Merrimack Street. I just want to address a few of the things that have been said. I was online for the previous meeting, and I think that there's been a lot of careful attention in detail paid to both the plan as far as showing the landscaping and design. I think another thing that people need to, I've sold houses on the street, I'm a realtor, and you know, the comment that was just made that there's nothing like this, I would state that you're correct, but I would state as you drive down Hancock Street, there are many houses that are right on the lot lines. There was a freestanding condominiums that were done probably about 6 or 7 years ago as you turn onto Hancock Street that I find to be almost menacing. So both the detail that's been played to the design in this project, the fact that this lot sits lower, so as you're walking by, what I would say to the gentleman who commented there's no people drawn in, all you have to do is walk by and see where this lot sits. The fact that the height of these buildings has not been maximized. Once you have mature plantings, it's going to be a very pretty project, and it's going to be a great addition to that street. That's been a huge eyesore for a long, long time. So I think we should all consider how much better this is going to look. As far as the historical content is concerned, I'm very happy with what historical does in this town. And I think a lot of things have been preserved that were necessary, but we get a little bit into the, little boy who cried wolf when we take a look at any structure that is old and say that it needs to be saved. Quite frankly, that house could be picked up and put down in a Pennsylvania coal mining town. And no one, it wouldn't skip a beat. I don't think that it's necessarily representative of anything that's cohesive on Hancock. And I'd make the argument that at this point, it's nothing more than an eyesore. So I look forward to seeing this project to come to fruition. I think it will be good for the South End. It will be great for Hancock Street, and in general, it will be great for the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Growitz. Still have a couple of well, I think that we still have hands up, but
Yeah, just Tom Coulter-John. I know you spoke a moment ago. I'm not sure if that's a raised hand still left up, perhaps.
and now it's down.
Okay. No further comment then.
All right. Thank you, everyone. With public comment complete, we will go into questions from the board. And I'll start off with Mr. Delisle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would.
Mr. Delisle, you sound really weak. I don't know if it's just me, but the volume is.
Maybe it's just me. I don't know.
Nope.
Is that a little better?
That is.
Okay. So I do have a few questions for Ms. Graff. I was wondering if you could kind of walk us through the two buildings and just kind of explain a little bit about what the materials are that are going to be used on the exterior.
Sure,
Just to
Ken.
kind of add some sort of some detail there for the board members.
Sure can. So on the buildings and using this elevation here, you have some horizontal siding. So that is shown in a wider board length there on the top drawing. And then on showing the more vertical delineations on the there's a banding right at the sill of the windows of the second floor that is of the board and batten style. What I want to point out, and it might help for some of the butters in trying to understand some scale, while the renderings may not have, say, a human shown or a car shown, there is simply just the use of a door shown, this front door, to help demonstrate sort of floor by floor. If you can imagine that second floor of the three windows, if you can imagine that roof line is pushed down, again, I touched on this a little bit at the last meeting, that roof line is pushed down intentionally with the idea that there wasn't any plans for any third floor space in this volume as a way to, as a design effort to bring the scale down. So while there's discussion about scale, again, using that 27-foot building height, that's an average, because on a lower part of the slope, it's a little bit taller. So really, again, referencing the 35-foot length in which is our building height restriction in our city, we're pretty far from that. And again, trying to sort of be respectful of the volume in height for the neighborhood. So hopefully that answers to the scale vertically. And then going back to more siding delineations, it's really, Mr. Delisle, it is a continuation of areas of vertical siding of the shiplap and then the horizontal boarding. There are some moments, and you'll see it in somewhat of a gray, like this bay on the top left drawing, and then there's a bay window on the bottom right. That's with the potential that there might be possibly some that is natural, possibly, is what meaning versus a solid color. So that's what those toned areas could possibly be. And that's a continuation. Okay.
Yeah, okay, that's some good detail. And is the material a natural product, or is that decided yet?
It's likely it's likely going to be that there's these cementitious products that are great for these hard New England winters, and they last longer than the natural wood. But that they appear to be a wood, and they're used commonly throughout our city.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. Another further sort of clarification from last week, I'd like to pose the question to Mr. Caswell again. I know last week I asked you and you took us through the stormwater issue, and I'm wondering if you could just explain that again, maybe a little bit more briefly, but just to explain again how I think last week, or excuse me, last meeting, the concept was that there's not going to be water sort of migrating off this property onto the Purchase Street properties.
Jay, are you available? So while he,
Jay's unmuted. I'm not sure if he's able to unmute himself. I could speak to that myself, though.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to spring a trap on anyone there. Maybe I'll redirect that to Attorney Mead.
No, I think that's fine. Just if I could, this is Andy Port, Planning Director. I think Jay's going to answer the question, but to be brief about it, the Planning Board has a review of Levitt Court that they'll be doing under the regulations here in Newburyport. So the typical review process is that the board's peer review consultant looks at the stormwater management for that new paved area. And as long as they sign off on how that is being dealt with, there's agreement as part of that process that there's no additional peak flows or anything onto anybody's adjacent property. So bottom line is there is a review process for that will be done by the planning board specifically. But I think Jay may want to speak to it as applicant.
Yep. Am I unmuted?
yes.
You are. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I kind of got into it a little bit too far probably last time. So they do a calculation of how much is permeable, how much is unpermeable, and we have to control. Engineers do calculations of how much stormwater we have to handle. Mass state law dictates that you cannot dump your stormwater on anybody else's property. That's a statewide law. So we're going to be under direct scrutiny by the planning board. That's where their purview is. And we'll have to show like retention areas, how much is permeable. They take into account the roof lines, the asphalt, and everything else. And that's where it all goes to peer review at the planning board level. So our engineers do calcs. They send it off to the city engineers. They check their calcs. At the end of the day, they make sure that no stormwater that comes off goes on anyone else's property.
And I would add, Jay, that while there's certainly some increase in impervious surface on 27, there's a significant reduction on 21 to 25, and none of it right now has any stormwater facilities.
Exactly.
And it will all have the appropriate stormwater facilities.
I mean, quite frankly, if they're having problems with this site right now on Purchase Street, I mean, that's all prior to the purchase that I'm going to be making. I'd just like to put everyone's mind at ease that if they are having water flow problems because it drops down, that's all been there. It'll all be addressed. And if there is an issue, it'll be completely alleviated because I have to. And there's no choice in it. So.
Thank you both. I think that's really helpful on that particular issue. Mr. Moore, that's the extent of my questions.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Delisle. Move on. Questions from Ms. Rachel Webb.
Thank you. I'm looking at the staff report, and there was a comment about how, that the Office of Planning is awaiting a written opinion from the city solicitor regarding the destruction of the building's exterior walls and so forth. Andy, you want to comment on that?
Sure. Just briefly, the gist of it, I think, was discussed at the last board meeting. It was brought up that there was a question about whether or not the zoning determination that was issued by the zoning administrator, whether that needed to be revised because, in fact, the plans that are shown here might trigger the demolition control overlay district threshold for needing a DCOD or demolition control overlay district special permit. So that question is being reviewed right now by the zoning administrator with legal counsel. The assumption was we would circle back. Unfortunately, we were not able to do that prior to this meeting. We're assuming a continuance of this hearing that would allow us to close that loop. So. But that really comes down to, if you look at the structure on the right there, just the original historic structure with the 2 new additions on it, is in the finer grain details of the ordinance language, is that a trigger for a DCOD special permit in terms of demolition or destruction or the other terminology in that section of the ordinance.
So would your office be recommending then that we continue this application until we get that recommendation from council?
It would make sense to me to do that. I think that's more efficient for everybody, frankly. The office notes that the planning board still has to look at the Levitt Court aspect of this project. Not that I foresee any issues in the approval of that Levitt Court or the stormwater management for it. These are all things that I've routinely seen reviewed and approved previously, but that suggests that there is time to address, in the next week or two, close the loop on the DCOD special permit question, just so that everybody has comfort that what is being approved here, these plans are actually the plans that will stand, rather than debating whether or not they might need to be revised to address the need for a DCOD special permit, which would then force the board, the applicant, and others to sort of cycle back again. So to us, it would be more efficient for everybody to continue this hearing. If all other issues are addressed to the board's satisfaction, continue for that aspect. If there's something else that's outstanding, then to address that as well. I just want to note for the record that I think it's good that the landscape plan has been provided by the applicant. They've clearly closed the loop there on the other aspect of whether or not the project is more or less detrimental to the neighborhood. So I think that's a good aspect of this updated revision to this project. But the only outstanding issue from my perspective is that DCOD special permit inquiry. The rest of it, I think, is the board's discretion as to the typical criteria in the ordinance.
Thank you. I guess I'd like to commend the applicant for reworking this to the extent that they have since the last ZBA meeting. It's going to be a project of very high visibility from the rail trail, and as has been stated, it currently is a neighborhood eyesore, and this is a tremendous improvement. I just question the attached garages just adding to the overall massing. I think I brought up this point last time, that I wondered if if the garages were separated, if it would just, how it would just reduce the overall scale of the residential part of the development. And it is, it's a development of 4 units total, to have detached garages. I know it may not be as desirable in new construction, but it may be more historically accurate. I know I have a 2-car detached garage in my home, and I live in the North End. It's an old house. So I don't know. I just raised that as a point of discussion. I don't know if the architects or the developers had considered detached garages.
Mr. Chair, if I could respond to Ms. Webb's comments.
Go right ahead.
So I want to take, I certainly appreciate your comments, Rachel, because a lot of work has gone into the project. But I do want to point out something and take issue with a comment that Ms. Nikotic made earlier related to 21 to 25 Hancock Street. We are here for a special permit for use, and the review of the use within the special permit criteria does not go to design, with all due respect. The fact of the matter is, the applicant could put a single family home on this property within the setbacks, within the dimensional requirements, and it could be huge. It could be bigger than this home by, however big, right? And it could be 35 feet tall and wouldn't have to do any work to upgrade the rail trail. He could do it with a building permit, period. That's it. And that's not what he's choosing to do. He's choosing to get a special permit for use for 2 families, which is consistent with the neighborhood. And while I know that the board would like to review the design on 21 to 25, and the fact of the matter is that it does go with the 27 Hancock Street, the issue related to massing and size is an issue under special permit for nonconformities, not under special permit for use. And so I think the applicant has done a significant amount of work to try to reduce the massing and the length of that wall. They would like to have the garages attached. They have detached one garage off of this to reduce that length. And there's a significant run down Levitt Court. The current building on this site is horrific. The condition of the building and the project, the property is horrific and bad for the environment and bad for as a neighbor to the rail trail. We're asking for a special permit for use, 21 to 25. That can't be converted into design review. You can have all the comments in the world about design and massing on 27. I cannot argue that you can't do that. But I don't see anywhere in the criteria for special permit for use that there is a review of the design and massing.
Thank you, Attorney Mead. Ms. Weber, any more questions?
Let's see. No, I think that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Swanton, do you have any questions?
Yeah, I have a couple questions. Andy, if you could put up the slide 8, I think the landscaping slide, I just had one question on that. It's very helpful to see this. Given how visible this is and what a large lot this is that's left in the south end, it's nice. I appreciate you showing this. I realize this is not something you generally show the Zoning Board of Appeals. I guess my question is, it's tough to plant trees that big. What are we looking at? Are we looking at where the trees will be now or 10 years from now or 20 years from now? I mean, just try to get a sense of what are we looking at with this picture?
So I'm going to let Eileen answer much of that, Mr. Swanton. It's a really good question. Of course, those trees, you're not going to see canopies to that size. But so the street trees we're going to plant at what the city street tree ordinance requires and the street tree commission is. I believe that it's 2 to 3 inch caliper at chest height, which is a pretty good sized tree. It's about you can correct me if I'm wrong, Eileen, but it's between a 15 and 20 foot tall tree when it's planted. When you have 2 to 3 inch caliper at chest height. So those would be the ones along the street there. And then Eileen, I don't know if I know that Jordy and them talked about caliper, and we're going to add them to a plan later for the ones along the rail trail, but maybe you can add to that.
That's correct. And so I have to laugh a little bit too, because Lisa, when you're deferring to me, because I have to say I confess this is my first landscape architect drawing, and I did it in an effort to help the plan be submitted to the zoning board. Mike Hathaway provided the hand sketch drawing, but we needed to make changes working with the city on different things that were added, and it was just fastest that I produced it. But nonetheless, the only thing that I could explain is I do know scale, and I know that when I recreated Mike's drawing, hand sketch drawing, I know the scale of what's shown here, and I could tell you, say from the bottom right, that is a 40-foot canopy that's showing, a 35-foot around there. The ones anchoring Levitt Court are about 30. What I can't tell you, Mr. Swanton, is I have to assume when they draw these are of the maturity level. But nonetheless, this is the typical landscape drawing that they provide. So I hope that helps answer it. the low level growth that, those scale of those are about 10 feet, 12 feet shown in its diameter. And then going to those Norway spruce in the upper north corner, those are also about 28, 30 feet in diameter as well.
Okay, thank you.
I hope that helps.
Yeah, I know, I appreciate it. I don't want to dwell on it, but I just think it's important to realize that a tree that's 2 to 3 inches in diameter takes a long time to get this big.
Yeah, and if I could, Mr. Swanton, and you're absolutely correct, but it also, you don't want to plant them too big because then they're not healthy, which is why the Street Tree Commission does what they do. But the calipers will all be reviewed by those same 5 people that I listed earlier before it's finalized with the planning board.
Right, no, I get it. I guess my next question, you mentioned the planning board. I mean, this project, I think it's been said a couple times here, obviously requires the planning board to look at things. And this is your second visit here to the Zoning Board of Appeals. Have you yet had a first visit with the planning board?
No, we haven't. We're scheduled, I think the first meeting in April, Mr. Swanton. So we applied to the planning board. That's when they could fit us on the agenda. We were supposed to be on next week, but a week from Wednesday. But that's a pretty full agenda. So they moved us to their first meeting in April. But you have to start somewhere, right? So if we don't get the special permits for use from you, or know that that's what's going to occur, the applicant, there's a lot of money that's spent at the planning board, and we have begun that process.
Right.
So
I get that. I guess my next question is related to the planning board. I mean, you're drawing your frontage, a lot of your frontage for these houses off of that Levitt Court. And I guess I'm a little confused. I look at the town zoning map. I don't see Leverett Court on the town's official zoning map. Has the planning board, I realize there was back in the 20s, some subdivision plan that was done, but has the town accepted Leverett Court as a public way? And has the planning board actually decided that we can actually view that as a place to draw frontage?
So first of all, you don't have to have a public way to have frontage. Frontage can be drawn from a private or a public way. Secondly, if you look at the assessor's maps, you'll see that in fact Levitt Court does exist on the assessor's maps, which is more important. Thirdly, it exists on a subdivision plan that was filed and recorded prior to the adoption of subdivision control law in Newburyport, and therefore it has effect. So what we're doing is having the planning board affirm that through the special permit for courts and lanes.
Yeah, I'm very glad you're doing that. I think the architect mentioned you're going to formalize that. I look forward to formalizing. I just want to make sure I understood how that worked. I guess my next question has to do with scale.
The assessor's map. Thank you, Andy.
Yeah, I saw the assessor's map. The assessor's map. Notice how it says on that map, Hancock Street, and all the various streets are labeled except that one. It's the only street I can find in the South End that doesn't have a name on it. That's why I was wondering, is this really a street yet, or does the planning board have to do something?
Well, it is a private street because it was shown on a subdivision plan prior to the adoption of subdivision control law in the city of Newburyport. And if you want to take frontage on it, then you have to develop it to meet the subdivision standards and or the courts or lane standards, which is why we are going to the planning board.
Right, I get that, and I'm glad you're going there. I just think we're a little bit out of order here. I mean, I'd like to see you get that to make it an official street. I mean, you've asked, we all kind of took a poll last meeting. We're all, I think, comfortable with putting 2-family houses here. We all kind of said that. The next thing I'd like to bring up is scale. I looked at what you had here, and I said to myself, gee, I hope somewhere in the presentation she compares this to what they had last time, because I'm curious if the buildings got smaller, how much they got smaller. I didn't see it, so I developed my own little, I just compared the 2 sets of numbers. I sent Andy a little chart, a little very simple chart this morning. Andy, do you happen to have that? Because I just had a question about how this compares to what you had last time. So in this little page here, I just looked at what you proposed on February 23rd. You had houses totaling about 11,900 square feet and garages and totaling 14. Now we're looking on March 9th at a set of plans, and actually they've all gotten bigger, which I don't quite understand, because when I look at the minutes that we're going to approve tonight for the meeting of February 23rd, the majority of all of us on the zoning board of appeals had concerns not just about length, but about scale. And the scale of this project has actually grown. So I don't quite get it. What am I missing?
So I can speak to that in regards to scale. So we touched on this at the last meeting as well, and what elements contribute to assessing scale. That could be length, that could be height, that could be volume, right? So there were different areas that the first time around, we tried to squeeze the buildings down in volume and height, right? And that caused a bigger spread, if you will. Take the same volume and push it down from the top, it's going to have a bigger footprint. So this last round was an effort to pull together. I'll talk to 2125 first. That one in particular took a larger sort of squeeze than 27. And detaching the garage was one effort to remove it. That in say Jay's point of view, his goals that he had for some kind of living space were removed the minute you detached it, right? So while we detached that garage, we needed to recover some square footage. So yes, there is more. We pulled everything together. The last sort of bulk of 25, the back part of the living space, you'll see is a little bit bigger in footprint, a little bit more bulbous, if you will. And that happened just to make it more compact. But at the same time, we lost square footage in doing so. So we pushed up. So we'll see it in floor plan. I can push to that next, but what I'm trying to explain is that is the only unit that ended up having a third floor. And that's internally driven for goals for what kind of spaces he wants in these residences. So again, we lost footprint. We're down to 93 there. But there's a balance of, so does that read, again, it's the argument scale, is it height, length, it's a combination of all of those things that you've mentioned that we've all talked about. So, there are efforts in disconnecting roofs on 27 to help play with some of these volumes, to help visually separate them. Ideally, of course, we'd love to have two separate structures here. The reality is it's a 2,900, 3,000. That's the average, but in all these 4 units, that is not extreme in square footage, given the neighborhood. We're not on the high side, we're not on the low side, we're somewhere in the middle with that. There's a property down the road that's 6,000 square feet on the end of Hancock. So we're clearly not that, but that's a single family, and we're feeding that with a 2-family. So I hope this addresses some of that. Yes, there's a push and a pull, but it's really, again, it's more or less the same square footage. We're squeezing it in different areas. So the best way to explain it is we pushed it, but we kind of went up a little bit in the process.
Yeah, I was just surprised, because I thought after the last meeting that when we used the word squeeze, it somehow got bigger. So I don't get it. I also did not see on the slides that were presented a 6,000 foot residence. We are supposed to consider scale here, and most of the members describe scale as an issue. And I'm wondering, outside of the Brown School, are we creating the largest building in the South End here? Most of the buildings on the street are very small footprints compared to this. Aren't they? Put the charts back up. I couldn't see a 6,000 foot one there.
Well,
maybe I missed it.
If I could, Mr. Swanton,
Yeah.
I don't have the total floor area on any of the chart that I showed. I only show first floor area as shown on the assessor's map. I don't have total floor area on that. That's not what this comparison is. I have the first floor area as compared to the building lot size. I did not put the entire square footage of each of the units and or buildings.
All the ones on Hancock Street seem to be smaller than this building. I don't know. I see the chart, when I walk down the street and I look around, I just don't see a building anywhere near this size. I realize it's a very large lot. So I get it, that if you look at it as a percentage of acreage, you can kind of say, well, it's the same. But you wind up with a very different looking building, and we are supposed to consider scale. Anyway, since it came up so much last time and so many people raised it, and these buildings actually are larger, I just wanted to ask, and I guess I can move on. That was my question.
I think that I would like to approach this in a couple of different ways. There are units close across the street that are 3,000 square feet apiece in a 2-family. And the
which one? I don't think.
With all due respect to the scale question, that question applies to 21 to 25. Excuse me, to 27. It does not apply to 21 to 25. With all due respect, there is not one special permit criteria for use related to scale and massing.
I get that. I get that.
And so we're within the dimensional requirements. There's no FAR calculations. It's an interesting thing. We talk about the size of these buildings, but there's no FAR calculation for a dimensional requirement here. There's none. And so when a person comes in, they look at setbacks, they look at height, they look at lot coverage, they look at the things that are in the zoning table, the things that they are aware of that control the district. And that's what's available on this property. And actually less than what's available on this property.
No, I get that. I appreciate you pointing out that it's just due to the setback, but the setback does involve half the project here. And the fact that a very large building is going on that lot is amplified by the fact there's one across the street that's proposed to, or across Leverett Court, that's proposed to go in. So it's just, to me, it's a scale issue that it's a concern, that's all. So I don't, those are my questions. I guess I have no other questions at this time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Swanton. Mr. Chagnon, you have any questions?
I just have one. I had some that some of the other board members brought up, and I can ask this for the applicant. Is the lot going to be raised somewhat in the, I guess it would be the northwest corner towards the rail trail? If you walk by there now, there's a little bit of a gully in there, and the renderings make it look as though from the rail trail over to, say, the garage in the rear, it looks fairly level. So is that all going to be filled in so it is a somewhat more homogeneous level lot?
So I happen to have the planning board plans here. And that corner is right now 28.4. 28.4. The corner of the garage is going to be at 28.92, and the grading looks like it stays pretty much consistent. Along the rail trail, there's a little spot that's 26, and then it goes 27, 28, 29 towards the building. So it's still going to drop. There's still going to be a drop along the rail trail like it is today.
All right. Thank you. I have no other questions. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Shannon. Since Mr. Bennett called in from Florida, do you have any questions that you'd like to, I think for the effort, maybe? I think you deserve, you won't be voting, but if you had any questions that you want to bring up.
I have no questions. I'll defer until we have our discussions on the substance of the.
Very good.
proposal.
Very good. Thank you. As far as questions from me, I wonder if we go back and a question was brought up about the height of the newly detached garage. Do we have that information on what the height will be on that?
The garage.
Yeah.
I
Yep.
can give you that. I do not have that added in there. Andy, there's one perspective that I have it. I'm sorry, it's not part of the presentation, but it is in a perspective from the rail trail to help give a scale.
Okay.
But it is taught, it is, Mr. Moore, you know how in the detached accessory structures that are closer to the property line that they have a height restriction? While we are meeting the setbacks, this structure does not get limited to the 14-foot building height requirement. Actually, one more.
Yeah, I think there was one from
lower.
if you
rail
passed
trail.
it and looked back at it. I think I do recall that.
Yeah. And that'll show the dormer. There you see it in a little bit from that side. But you can see it's a one story. It has a dormer on one side.
Fair enough.
For light headroom.
Eileen, I'm sorry, was there a different image or slide that shows it
There's
better?
one further down on the rail trail, Andy. That might look back up.
That's the one.
Yeah, okay.
And that shows you the dormer side of the garage.
Just wanted to refresh.
Sure.
I think my colleagues have covered all the other details that I may have had in questioning. So I have no questions. So I think questions from the board are now closed, and we will go to deliberations. A lot on our plate here to discuss tonight. 27 Hancock is the special permit nonconformities to renovate, along with the use special permit, and 2125 correctly is for use only. And I'll leave it at that until further deliberation. So we should have our discussions go around the necessary data points for making decisions here while we talk about this. So I'm going to kick off with Mr. Delisle.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. I think as far as deliberations go, that, and this sort of gets back to, I think, what was really talked about last week. I'm comfortable with the two-family use at both 21 to 25 Hancock Street and at 27 Hancock Street. And I think that with respect to 27 Hancock Street, it sounds like there's still some uncertainty or some questions that remain before we can do anything with the special permit for nonconformities. So I think that, with that being said, in kind of poking around the neighborhood, the one thing that I noted that really kind of caught my eye relative to the length of the proposed buildings, and that taking this into account with Attorney Mead's comments that with respect to 21 to 25, this really doesn't matter. The church in the back of 21 to 25 Hancock Street, the church on Purchase Street, looks like from the assessor's card that's about 89 feet long and 40 feet wide. So there are other big buildings in the neighborhood. I don't know if that is taken as a positive or a negative, but I will put that on piece of information out there. Mr. Moore, do we want to go through the special permit findings here as part of this deliberation?
I think we'll do that. I think I'd like to have a little more discussion with the board first to see where people are on moving forward.
Okay. All right. So
we will come back to that.
Yeah. Okay. So as I've said, I am comfortable with the two-family use on both these properties.
Okay. Thank you. Ms. Webb?
Thank you. Yes, I as well am comfortable with the two-family use on both parcels. I am, however, feeling like, there's still some information that, procedurally we're looking for before rendering final decisions. So I feel as though there's some unfinished business here. with regard to the letter from the city solicitor and also the planning board.
Okay, fair enough. Mr. Swanton?
Yeah, I think Rachel said it pretty well there. I mean, I don't, we all said in the last meeting that the two-family use is fine. And as far as the 21 to 25, since we know the town's lawyer is looking at this open question, it'd be nice to get their opinion before we have to decide on that. It'd be also nice, since this is headed to the planning board shortly, to see where they are on the whole thing. But I think the applicant should feel comfortable that, you know, the board is comfortable with the two-family use. You know, if that's a big question. I still have a problem with the rest of this application. We have to wait for the council, and scale also comes into consideration, and the fact that you have, you know, what's being built across the street from it as well as part of that scale thing, in my mind. But so I think we're okay with the use, but I think there's still some information to be learned on the rest of it. Those are my comments.
Mr. Chagnon?
Yeah, I have to agree with my colleagues. I don't have a problem with the two-family use on either lot. And if there are some open issues as far as the DCOD and the solicitor coming back with comments, I guess I would tend to lean towards waiting to get that input. With that said, if there aren't any issues with the DCOD, I'm probably okay with the scale. I do appreciate the applicant making the changes they did and coming back with the renderings and the you know, the trees, the drawing with the trees and everything. I think that was that made it a lot easier to understand what they were doing. But I'm okay with waiting until we do get some additional information so we can make a more informed decision.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chagnon. Mr. Bennett?
Oh, I would agree on both parcels, two-family units, certainly. I believe the criteria have been clearly satisfied for that. As to the scaling and mass, I also agree that I don't find these, the one structure that is subject to that analysis to be inappropriate in terms of scale, massing, or size relative to the property lot itself or relative to the neighborhood. And I can't find a metric to suggest to me otherwise. And I believe the applicant has done a commendable job in developing this in a way which in my view is a market improvement to both properties.
All right, thank you, Mr. Bennett. I think my colleagues have expressed a lot about what I was feeling is that, first of all, the detailed improvements and just showing the landscaping that was going to be proposed was very helpful. Again, not our purview, but very helpful in going over this plan. And while the size, scale, and massing only applies to the 27 Hancock Street building expansion, we have been asked to look at both of these together, and both buildings are meant to basically kind of mirror each other. So, you know, one sort of depends on the other, and I kind of feel like the rest of my colleagues in that while we have this KP law addressing the DCOD, handling of the existing historical house and how that needs to be treated, that could really affect what happens on 27, which I'm sure would affect which is going to happen on 21, 25, especially since we're looking at these in tandem. So I guess, you know, it sounds to me like the board's leaning more towards requesting to continue this until we get an opinion on the DCOD issue and to make sure the site plan approval is done, which is going to be, you know, 1st of April. Is that kind of where we're standing with this?
Mr. Moore, if I could.
Yes.
So I don't think that anybody should fool themselves that we're going to be in and out of the planning board in one night. That's not how the planning board works, because they have peer review. We have to go in and have a conversation with them about it. And then we're going back to them. You know, at some point, somebody has to go first. And that's what we're asking the board to do. So I understand the outstanding question related to 27. I understand that. I'm not happy about it. It's not how the process works, but all of a sudden it does. So be it. But I would ask the board to at least vote on the use on 21 to 25. So we at least get something done as we go into the planning board, and then continue the meeting to after the first planning board meeting, which would be April. Our first meeting with the planning board is April 7th. So your meeting, I think, would be maybe the 13th.
Yeah, I don't have that in front.
Yeah, it would be April 13th. So I would ask the board's indulgence to at least do that on 21 to 25 and continue 27. They're two separate applications. And then we'll come back to you after we go to the planning board on the 7th.
All right, I appreciate that. Board, we have the applicant asking if we want to take these separately tonight and vote on 2021-04 special permit for two-family use. How do we feel about that?
Can I make a comment? This is Ken Swanton.
Yeah.
You know, I think we've all said in the last meeting and tonight, we don't have a problem with a two-family use. My concern with voting on it before the planning board even sees this thing is I've never voted on one. Technically, maybe you can do it if it's a paper street, but until the planning board kind of formally makes this a street on the town zoning map, even both of the houses don't have the frontage they need, and it's, I don't see what's wrong with going to the planning board and saying, yeah, we've been there twice. Both times everybody said they have no problem with two-family houses. That's clear. So I don't see why voting on, I'm uncomfortable voting on it when the street hasn't even, I would like the planning board to chime in that the street is one that you can take frontage off of. I have a lot of confidence in you, Lisa Mead, but I'd like to hear the planning board say it. Anyway, that's just my opinion. And I don't see what you gain from it really, because you already know we're all okay with that.
Anyone else on the board have a comment? All right, I would agree with Mr. Swanton that I don't think the two-family use is an issue. And I just procedurally, I'm just not sure if we should, if I should entertain a motion to go ahead with the vote on 21, 25 and go from there and see if we get a motion to approve, and that's how we'll deal with it.
Mr. Moore, if you're saying you're not going to vote for it, Mr. Swanton's not going to vote for it, we'd sadly request a continuance to your April 13th meeting.
Okay, board applicant has requested a continuance to our April 13th meeting. And that is for both 21, 25 and 27 Hancock Street. Do we have a motion?
I'll make that motion, Rachel Webb.
I'll second it. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead and
finish the motion.
I'll make a motion to continue 21-25 Hancock Street, case number 2021-04 special permit to the ZBA meeting of, sorry, what was the date? April
13th.
13th. Thank you.
I'll second it, Ken Swanton.
All right, we have a motion made by Ms. Webb, second by Mr. Swanton to continue 2125 Hancock Street, 2021-04 to the April 13th ZBA meeting. We'll now go for the vote on that. Mr. Delisle?
Yes.
Ms. Webb,
Yes.
Mr. Swanton,
Yes.
Mr. Chagnon,
Yes.
and Mr. Moore is also a yes. Majority, or passed unanimously. So yes, this will be continued to our April 13th meeting. Now we still have 2021-02 and 2021-03. Do we have any a motion on this, on these two applications?
This is Bud Shagnon. I'd like to make a motion to continue 27 Hancock Street, 2021-02 and 2021-03. Special permit for nonconformities and special permit to allow two-family use respectively to the April 13th meeting.
I'll second it. Rachel Webb.
All right, we have a motion made by Mr. Chagnon, seconded by Ms. Webb to continue both 02 and 03 on 27 Hancock Street to the April 13th meeting. We now go to a vote. Mr. Delisle?
Yes.
Ms. Webb?
Yes.
Mr. Swanton?
Yes.
Mr. Chagnon?
Yes.
Mr. Moore is also a yes. That's all in the affirmative. 27 Hancock Street is also continued until our April 13th meeting. I thank you all for your patience on that. We now move to the next hearing on the agenda tonight, and that is Louisa Tanner and John Watkins, care of Lisa Mead, at Mead, Tellerman and Costa, 260 Northern Boulevard. Applicants requesting a special permit for nonconformities to renovate and reconstruct a pre-existing nonconforming single-family home. Might we hear from the applicant?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, Lisa Mead, Tellerman Costa, on behalf of Louisa Tanner and John Watkins, who own the home at 260 Northern Boulevard. There's actually two homes on the lot. Andy, if you could the presentation, that would be great. With me this evening are certainly Louisa and John, or Jack, as well as Scott Brown, who's the architect on the project. So the property is located in the R3 zoning district and the Plum Island overlay district. And there are two single-family homes on this property. Those two single-family homes have existed on this property since at least 1969. And so they're pre-existing non-conforming. If you go to the next slide, please, Andy. The proposal is to make no changes to the existing footprint, but to add on to the second floor, and you'll see here in a minute why, and to renovate the existing first floor. There is, we'll keep the roof line change under 35 feet as required by the ordinance. There's no increase in that. And we're seeking an approval to increase the FAR from 0.47 to 0.50, which requires the special permit. There will be an additional bedroom for a total of 3, but as Scott's going to review, that's actually splitting up the space that currently exists on the first floor. The property currently includes 130.36 feet of frontage, where 120 is required in the district, and 6,240 square feet of area, where of course 12,000 is required in the district. The current structure was built in 1969 and therefore is built at grade, wasn't built on pilings in 1969. If you go to the next slide, please. So here you can see, many of you might know this property. Probably you all have driven out there. This is just a few houses down from the point. So that would be the northernmost end of Plum Island. And it's a property that has this little house and a smaller house beside it. The north side of Reservation Terrace is in the back. And then of course, Northern Boulevard is in the front. If you go to the next slide, please, Andy. So here you have it. And this is where you can see where the addition is going to go. So there's a very small second floor. And as Scott's going to show you in a minute, to get up to that second floor right now is a spiral staircase. Jack and Louisa bought this home as a retirement. There's currently a bedroom on the second floor, and what they're trying to do is have safer stairs up to the second floor with an additional bathroom on the second floor for ease of access. But this is the existing footprint that the addition is going to be built over. And if you can go to the next slide, please. And this is from Northern Boulevard. And you can see that there will be some changes to the decking, actually a reduction in the size of decking around the house. And here's a side view. And you go to the next slide, please. And this is the inside of the second floor. This is the bedroom, and that corner over there houses the spiral stairs that come up right now. If you go to the next slide, Andy. And this is the first floor where you can see the spiral stairs going up to the second floor. So at this point, what I'd like to do is turn this over to Scott to review the plans.
Well, thank you, Lisa. Good evening. Scott Brown, the architect for the project. As Lisa had already mentioned, the whole impetus of this project has been about the replacement of the existing spiral stair and the addition of a second floor bathroom for a couple that are considering aging in place here. In the course of solving these issues, we were also tasked with cleaning up the exterior, bringing up the level of finishes, bringing up the level of quality, and consistent with what some of the other houses in the immediate vicinity are doing and have already done. And this includes the replacement of the existing vinyl siding and poor quality windows. So this is the existing condition floor plans, and I've included these because I think it's important for everybody to see, everybody to understand why it is what we are doing. And in the lower right-hand corner there, you'll see the existing second floor plan. And as Lisa mentioned, there's the spiral stair. You know, it's a good sized bedroom on the second floor, but the bedroom is open to below with the spiral stair there. You know, on the left side, you'll see the existing, first floor plan. Again, the spiral stair that we're hoping to replace, and a rather ill-proportioned bedroom in the lower left-hand corner of that plan. So it is currently a two-bedroom house. And Andy, if we could go to the next slide, which is the proposed, we're actually 2 slides away, A1.1, which is the proposed floor plans. Here we go. So first thing you'll notice is in the proposed first floor plan to the right, we have reconfigured that existing bedroom space into 2 spaces. In order to do that, we had to move an existing bathroom to the front of the house, making it a much more efficient floor plan. So technically we are adding another bedroom to this house, but it's entirely within the existing square footage. And it's just, we've been able to create this by simply moving things around and making it a more efficient layout. The other thing you'll notice is this new sort of code compliant stair that we're putting in. A new code compliant stair takes up an awful lot of square footage, often more than we want to give up. And in this case, at the second floor level, it has added 112 square feet to the project. You also see on the second floor, where we've added this bathroom that we spoke about. There's also a closet up there. And yeah, maybe one could argue that's a little bit more than we need, but this is really about trying to address some of the constructability issues of the project, and also trying to make for clean architecture on the exterior. And Andy, if we could go to the next slide, please. There we go. So these are proposed elevations for the project. As Lisa had mentioned, all of our additions are within the footprint. The only square footage that we are adding is at the second floor level. We are proposing a new roof on this. We have fought very hard to keep the height of it down. And despite putting a new roof on this, this structure is a mere 18 inches higher to the median roof line over what is currently there. And Andy, if we can just go back to the site plan. There we go. Thank you. And just finally, just a quick word about the FAR as it pertains to this project, because I know that this board has struggled with this. So at a glance, the existing FAR of 0.47 and a proposed FAR of 0.5 may make it seem like, we have a giant project on a small lot. But keep in mind, we have 2 dwelling units on the same lot, both of which need to be factored into this calculation. Also, very importantly, had I calculated this a year ago prior to the planning office's memo about how to calculate FAR, I would have arrived at a very different number. You know, a year ago, I would have had a proposed FAR of 0.29 and an existing FAR of 0.26. You know, the difference is that I would not have included the basements plural, because there's two structures here, two structures with basements. You know, both of these structures have basements over 6 feet high, you know, and because they're over 6 feet, they both need to be included. And 260A Northern Boulevard has a basement of exactly 6 feet, which needs to be included. They're both unfinished. They're both entirely below grade. And the inclusion of these has really skewed the numbers. So it's not a good reflection or a good barometer of what we are doing here and how this, you know, compares to other structures in the neighborhood. And finally, I think that, you know, what we are proposing is modest. And I think it's certainly an improvement over what currently is there now. And with that, I will hand it back to council. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Scott. So with the board's decision here is in 21G4A because of the proposed increase in the FAR by 0.03. And the board needs to determine whether or not that is substantially more detrimental to the existing than the existing non-conforming structure to the neighborhood or to the PIOD. And in this instance, I might remind the board that substantially means to a great or significant extent in the context of the neighborhood and when you read it in the context of the ordinance. So if you go to the next slide, Andy. So first, there are no changes to the footprint of the home. There's no impact on lot coverage. And we actually are reducing the size of the exterior decks. We are not impacting any of the dune or sand area in the area. We're going to make the home safer for the residents of the home by removing that non-code compliant spiral staircase. You'll see there's a change in the roof style and an expansion over the existing first floor, but again, nothing to the base of the house as it exists. The proposal is compatible with the surrounding area and certainly does not increase the height in a great extent other than 18 inches, as Scott has pointed out. The purpose to remodel this home is to provide, as I said earlier, a bathroom and safer stairs onto the second floor. And as Scott indicated, those stairs take up a significant amount of square footage. The applicant doesn't propose to excavate again and do any damage to the dune around the home, and it will be nominal. We believe, based upon all of that, the board can find that the proposal is not substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood or to the PIOD. Again, I remind the board that in the PIOD, to go above the FAR that's already non-conforming requires a special permit and not a variance. I'm compelled to once again point out to the board that the planning staff is suggesting that this board do something that actually it has no power to do and may not actually entertain. Now, the planning office is stating you should be careful about not approving the special permit for fear of what might happen on the island. And as such, even small expansions should not be approved because then there would be a small expansion and a small expansion and a small expansion. The planning staff's request is misguided for a couple of reasons. First, the zoning ordinance permits such applications to be filed and fairly considered to determine whether or not this board decides whether or not they're substantially more detrimental to the PIOD or to the district or to the neighborhood. Interestingly, and we've had this conversation about a year ago, if the city wants to change the ordinance, the city can change the ordinance. 2 weeks ago, there almost was a proposal to change the ordinance. In fact, the city council withdrew it and didn't even consider the change in the ordinance. And so the legislative body has said, this is what you have to work with. You may or may not be comfortable with that, but the legislative body has decided not to change the ordinance, notwithstanding the planning staff's comments to you. Secondly, under the law, it's not appropriate to speculate about future unknown circumstances relative to growth and development in the PIOD. In the case of Fitzsimmons versus the Board of Appeals of Chatham, the court said the board erred when it took into account as bearing upon a present decision, a putative problem to be faced in the indefinite future upon now uncertain facts. In the Britain Board of Appeals versus Gloucester, the appeals court said, the board's concern regarding the precedential effect of granting the plaintiff's permits application was that in the long term, it would result in the expansion of 2 or 3 stories of shoreline residences on tiny lots throughout the neighborhood. However, neither Chapter 48, Section 6, nor the bylaw permits denial of special permits based upon undifferentiated fear of the future. The board may not deny a permit simply by conjuring up a parade of horribles, particularly when it has the power to prevent them in the future. So while the planning staff may want you to consider what might happen in the future, what the board has to consider are the facts in front of it. And in this instance, there is a request for a very small increase in the FAR that doesn't impact the size of the footprint of the structure or how it's constructed. And I finally want to comment on the planning staff's suggestion that you put this off too, until this Conservation Commission has an opportunity to determine whether or not this is considered a substantial improvement. And I respectfully suggest again that the board doesn't have the right to do that. In fact, the Wetlands Protection Act says that an applicant should receive all other permits before coming to the Conservation Commission. They don't have to, but the Conservation Commission can require it. Secondly, the applicant may get this decision and may never apply for a building permit and may never go forward. But that doesn't mean that this board can't make a decision. The reality here is this: it's just a matter of circumstances. The applicant is still gathering construction estimates and quite frankly is waiting on an appraisal. And appraisers, if anybody has done any work in the real estate area in the last couple of months, appraisers are so behind that they're waiting a month and a half to get an appraisal. So they would like to get this permit if possible, or at least get this board's determination while they await the rest of the work that they need to do for the Conservation Commission, which is not a requirement of this board. So the applicant respectfully suggests and requests that the board approve this special permit for this increase in the FAR for the reasons stated. I would also note to the board that the applicant has provided 3 letters of support from 266 Northern Boulevard, 255, and 268 Northern Boulevard from its neighbors. And we're happy to answer any questions or provide any clarification to you.
Thank you, Attorney Mead. With the presentation done, we now turn to asking for public comment. So anyone, again, that is listening into this and wants to comment on this proposal, please electronically raise your hand to be recognized. Not seeing any hands raised.
Seeing no hands, Chair.
All right. One more second if anyone needs to raise their hand, hit that little raise hand button. Going once, going twice. Seeing none, we will close public comment and go to questions from the board, starting with Mr. Delisle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Questions for the applicant regarding everyone's favorite topic, the FAR. So where we're picking up the extra FAR here is where the second floor is becoming, is increasing in size to kind of match or almost match the footprint of the first floor. That's my first question.
Yeah, I'll let Scott answer that, but yes, that is the answer. Scott, you want to be more
The two
specific?
areas, like, Andy, could we go to the proposed floor plans A11?
Thank you, Attorney Mead.
There we go. So on the second floor, yes, Mr. Lau, you are correct. It's the stair at the front of the house, which has added 110 square feet to the project. I haven't calculated the square footage of, so that's where the increase in FAR has been, and also the addition of the master bathroom and master closet there in the top left-hand corner. And those are the two things that have moved the dial with regard to FAR.
And there's no change to the footprint on the first floor, correct? The foundation remains the foundation and the footprint remains the footprint.
That is correct.
Okay. And then when you provided sort of how it would have been calculated a year ago versus how it is calculated now, if in a hypothetical world this on stilts, and we were just still talking about FAR and we were ignoring the height, if it were up on the metal stilts rather than having a concrete block foundation, that did you say, Mr. Brown, 800 square feet or something like that is attributable
Yeah, I
to
don't know the square footage off
basement?
my top of my head, but I do know that it would be,
Okay.
existing would be 0.26, proposed would be 0.29. And again,
the simple reason for that is because that square footage attributed to the basement goes away if it's up on stilts.
That's right. That's right. And don't forget, this includes both
Okay.
dwelling units on the property.
Yeah, that was my final question. The other dwelling unit is not at all involved in this renovation and not at all subject to this special permit, correct? That might be for Attorney Mead.
Thank you. It would be subject to special permit only because the special permit applies to the property. But there's nothing.
Okay.
Yeah, there's nothing being proposed for the smaller cottage.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you both.
Thank you, Mr. Delisle. Ms. Webb, do you have any questions?
Yes, I do. I'm interested in the conversion of the existing bedroom space on the first floor and how does that become 2 bedrooms? Is that what Mr. Brown said?
That's correct. We can see in the, the proposed first floor plan right there that, I'm calling it a bunk room. And I'm calling the one in the lower left-hand corner a bedroom.
To make those spaces work, have you moved that wall out? I mean, are they wider rooms?
No, I mean the wall that goes north-south.
Mm.
You mean the common wall where have a note saying consider pocket door?
Yes.
So yeah, it's very important for structural reasons. We're trying to sort of think about like how we're going to put this together. And it's very important that we sort of keep that wall in place because that is a bearing wall. So we did not want to move that at all. So we're trying to, do our best to try to limit the amount of renovation in the house to as little as possible.
So is that technically a bedroom because there's no closet in there? I thought the building code definition needs a closet and a window.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, that's why I mentioned it. Sort of barely. I mean, I could see an argument both ways. I don't know that a bedroom per the building code absolutely needs a closet. So I think it's right. I think it's borderline.
Interesting. Because I mean, you're proposing the addition of a bedroom where it's a 2-bedroom house now. It will be a 3-bedroom house when you're done. So I think it would be good to get that resolved if that third space really is technically a bedroom in terms of building code or not.
Ms. Webb, but it doesn't matter because the applicant's allowed to go up to 3 bedrooms. They're allowed to go up by right to one bedroom. So if they didn't do anything else in this house and came in and did interior renovations and added a bedroom, they wouldn't require any permits other than a building permit. So it's allowed under the PIOD to go up to 3 bedrooms since it currently has 2.
Yeah, this is Andy Port, the Director of Planning and Development. I would, my understanding is that it's not a requirement, but the bottom line is I would agree that this property has an allowance for the 1 additional bedroom. So I guess in terms of whether or not the board's approving it or not, it is within the ordinance to allow this additional bedroom.
Thanks, Andy. Any further questions, Ms. Webb?
No, I think other than that, I'm all set. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Swanton?
Yeah, I have a question. You know, we don't see a lot of these where there's 2 houses on the one lot. And we've been talking about the one house. When you talk about the FAR going from 0.47 to 0.50 or the old way, 0.26 to 0.29, does that include both houses on this lot or just this one house?
Yeah, it absolutely, the calculation includes both.
Both, okay.
Yeah, and the little blue house that we can see there in slide 7,
Yeah,
you know, off the top of my head, I believe that is, you know, first floor footprint around 460 square feet. And, you know, also be 460 square feet in the basement, that both of those count against the FAR calc.
I get it. So does the little house, I assume does it have bedrooms as well in there?
Yeah, I believe there's a bedroom in that house.
Okay, so when we talk about going from 2 to 3 bedrooms, we mean in the white house here, not in the darker house on the right. That also has, okay, I'm just trying to keep this straight because there's, you know, we haven't seen one of these, at least in my tenure here, with the 2 houses on one lot. You know, it's this FAR thing, we've struggled with it for a year now. I mean, you know, at the end of the day, we have to, as a board, figure out what's more detrimental to the neighborhood, what becomes substantially detrimental, not just to the neighborhood, but to the PIOD as a whole. And FAR is one of the few guidelines that we kind of like can see in there. There's also bedrooms and other things. And, you know, I have no problem with people rebuilding their houses, you know, and if you're under the FAR, you know, expand your house. But going over the FAR is where I wonder about whether it gets substantially detrimental. Now, in this case, it's already over, whether you do it the old way or the new way. And the question what you're really proposing is to go further over. And so I guess my question is, if you had to live within wherever you are, whether you're at 0.47 now under the new way of doing it or 0.26, you had to live with where you are and you wanted to make the renovations so the folks here could age in place or the different things they want to do. I mean, did you look at that case of, you know, I mean, how many square feet are you off and where could you take them out of? And did you go through that?
Mr. Swan, I'm sorry, do you mean to get it under the,
just to stay with, no, just to stay where you are. I realize you're over. I'm not suggesting, you know, somebody has to go to shrink their house to do something, but just to, you know, if you want to, you know, make the bathroom on the 2nd floor or whatever you're trying to do there. Did you look at, is there a way you could design this such that you did not expand the overage on the FAR?
well, you know, without providing, you know, part of the whole, you know, like I said, the whole impetus of this project is about putting a new code compliant stair into the 2nd floor. And we cannot do that without increasing the FAR. You know, it adds 112 square feet to the project. And there's really nowhere else. You could go back to the floor plan. There's really nowhere else to put it here. You know, we have to go outside the volume, you know, therefore increasing the square footage.
So it's both that and the closet and the bathroom on the 3rd. Those are the 3.
I did mention that, you know, I mean, yeah, we are providing, you know, the bath there and a closet on the 2nd floor. And you know, I did mention that it's perhaps, you know, a little bit more than the minimum that we need there. But that's really about two things. One, trying to sort of make for clean architecture, clean roof lines on the exterior, and also trying to sort of deal with some of the existing conditions that we have below us, you know, to make this something that we can construct easily and economically. And that's why that has that footprint there with the master bathroom and the master closet.
Yeah,
So-
I appreciate you
Yeah,
addressing.
those two spaces are design driven but the stair is really, that's more of an engineered solution. Building code tells us that, you know, we need to have a certain number of, risers. They, you know, the treads need to be a certain width. And that pretty much determines the, you know, what we need for space there.
So if I could just follow up on that, because I think, Mr. Swanton, you know, I've heard you all struggle for the last year on this FAR question, but the way the ordinance is written is that there may be instances where even if you're already over the FAR, or even if you're not, interestingly, even if you're not over the FAR, you can go over the FAR with a special permit, not with a variance, right? So this is standard. If you're over the FAR, it's already non-conforming, and you can seek to increase that non-conformity, intensify that non-conformity with a special permit for non-conformities. And the decision is not that you just draw a bright line and say you just can't do it. The question is it substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood or the PIOD than the existing condition? Substantially meaning to a great or significant extent. And in this instance, what is the harm to a great or significant extent to the PIOD? And it's all within the footprint. We're adding stairs to make it safer and a bathroom on the second floor, all of which are, the bathroom and the bedrooms, all of which are calculated into the size and operations of the sewer and water system on Plum Island. That's how the zoning was drafted. But I think it's important to remember that there is a different standard for Plum Island, that the city council, when it adopted the zoning originally for Plum Island, didn't make going over the FAR a variance, didn't make it a variance, because the island lots and houses are so unique. And so they didn't draw a bright line because they understood every situation needed to be taken into consideration in and of itself in the neighborhood. And so the question is this additional, 300 and some odd square feet or something like that, substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood or the PIOD than the existing condition? And I don't think that the board can draw a bright line. I think you have to take every application as its own application.
Yeah, if I could just follow on that. I mean, I'm not bringing up a variance here. I mean, even if this was a variance, there's no strange lot or soil conditions. I mean, that's kind of that's not what I'm bringing up. And we do sometimes make exceptions. We had one a couple months ago where somebody, was in a wheelchair and had to put a vestibule in the front of their house, and they went over the limit, and we were like, we get it, that's fine. This is a case where on top of it, you're adding a bedroom, which kind of like, it's, I realize this within the footprint of the first floor, but it makes it even harder.
But you're also allowed to do that by right. You're allowed to add this bedroom by right.
I know, but we on the board have to decide whether taking a house that's already over the FAR number is detrimental to the PIOD as a group. And I just needed to ask whether you looked at other ways to do this expansion, maybe taking some space out of somewhere else. I don't know. Taking some space out of the little house next to it. I don't know. I just here to ask questions at this stage, and I just was asking the questions. So that's all. And I appreciate it. Thank you for the discussion. I have no other questions.
And I think I appreciate your conversation about it too, Mr. Swanton. I don't mean to dismiss it at all. I think that the conversation is important.
Thank you both. Mr. Chagnon.
I think my colleagues have asked all my questions. I'm good, Chair. Thank you.
You're welcome. Mr. Bennett?
I have no questions.
Excellent. I just had a couple of questions. Actually, I think I just had one. Can you just address the deck sizes and any changes that are going on there?
I think if you go, Mr. Moore, Andy, if you go to the site plan, and then Scott, you can pipe in on this, but I believe that we have the indication on the site plan of the reduction and change of sizes of the decks. So we do. So if you can blow up that a little bit. So we're removing, you can see on the left-hand side, removing the 101 square feet of the deck and stairs and replacing it with 56 square feet of new stairs. You can see that. If you go over to the right-hand side, we're removing the existing entry stair and landing, which is 41 square feet. But then at the back, there's a new covered entry stair landing at 37 square feet. So that's a difference of about 4 square feet reduction. And then the other ones are second story. So I think that's important. And one of the elevations, it looked kind of like, or actually one of the floor plans, it looked like that front corner was filled in, and it's not actually filled in. It's a deck. It's covered by roof, but it is a deck. So the house is kind of an L. To Mr. Swanton's point. The compact, I think Scott can describe that, the attempt to limit the indoor living space, if you will, on the house, but maintain the design and lines of the proposal was important to the applicant.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't have any further questions.
Mr. Moore, this is Mr. Delisle. Can I just poke in with another question?
Go right ahead.
Thank you. Just quickly, just if Mr. Brown could just describe, the materials on the exterior, that would be, I think, helpful as well.
Well, what you're seeing in this rendering is that we're hoping, budget permitting, for a metal roof on this project. There's a couple of metal roofs in the neighborhood that my clients, gravitate to, and we're hoping to do something that is as nice as those other metal roofs. We're doing white cedar sidewall shingles here. Hopefully they're going to be pre-dipped and a color. Planning to replace, like I mentioned, the windows with high quality aluminum clad window, and the rest of the materials would be rot resistant materials, either painted polyash or PVC where appropriate.
Good. Thank you. That sounds really nice, actually. Thank you very much, Mr. Brown.
Does that take care of it, Mr. Delisle?
Yes, indeed. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, sir. Any further questions from anyone on the board? All right, hearing none, we close that and we will go to deliberations, and we circle right back to Mr. Delisle.
Thank you. So for me, I agree. I mean, I hear what Mr. Swanton is saying, and I typically, in previous FAR Plum Island situations, I have been pretty much in lockstep with Mr. Swanton. But I think with this one being on an existing foundation, and you're doing the things on the second floor as of right, I'm having a little bit of a hard time really wanting to stand in the way of this project. So I'm okay with this project. I don't think that the expansion really would constitute something that would be substantially more detrimental to either the neighborhood or the PIOD. So I can support this project.
Okay, thank you very much. Ms. Webb?
I agree. Mr. Delisle could not have said it better. That's all I have to say. Thanks.
Very succinct. I like that. Move on to Mr. Swanton.
Well, I usually concur with my colleagues, but I don't, I just, I don't like intensifying a density of a property that's already over the level, particularly one with two houses on a little lot. So I cannot support this.
Thank you, Mr. Swanton. Mr. Chagnon?
I have to agree with Ms. Webb and Mr. Delisle. I think I can support this. I think it's a fairly modest change to the existing home. And although it is outside the fire calculation, I think it's within the purview of this board to make that type of decision. So I can support this application.
Thank you, Mr. Chagnon. I'm going to echo my colleague, Mr. Delisle. I think he probably spoke for all of us on this. The applicant correctly states that we struggle with FAR a lot with this, but this seems like a really unique property. I think the addition is thoughtful. It looks great, and there is kind of a unique setup to why the FAR is what it is. And while it's never a thing that you want to do as a board to go over the FAR, it is something that we can do by special permit, and I think it's reasonable, and I don't see it as more detrimental at all to the PIOD or the neighborhood. And additionally, in any recent discussions around changing, any kind of PIOD rules for expansion, it had been mentioned by some of the sponsors that vertical expansion was preferable and encouraged versus horizontal, and that's where they want to really look to control things. So first of all, nothing's moved forward, nothing's changed. We're going with the old PIOD rules, but if the general consensus seems to be vertical, and this is a vertical using the same footprint, fractionally worse, but to gain a lot of use and use and safety. Instead of echoing Mr. Delisle, I just rambled on, but yeah, I can support this as well. So at this point, I'll entertain a motion, I guess.
I'll make a motion, Mr. Delisle, to approve 260 Northern Boulevard special permit for nonconformities, file number 2021-7.
Motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second that motion, Chair.
Excellent. Motion made to approve by Mr. Delisle, second by Mr. Chagnon. We now go to a vote. Mr. Delisle.
Yes.
Ms. Webb.
Yes.
Mr. Swanton.
No.
Was that a no?
Yes, that was a no.
Thank you. Mr. Chagnon.
Yes.
And Mr. Moore is a yes. So that's 4 in the affirmative. The application is approved.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Next item on the agenda is 7 Shandell Drive. David and Laura Marr, care of Lisa Mead, Tellerman Costa. It's application 2021-08 special permit for nonconformities to remove and then reconstruct a pre-existing non-conforming single-family home. And might we hear from the applicant?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Lisa Mead, Tellerman Costa, 30 Green Street in Newburyport for the record. And with me this evening is David and Lisa Marr, who are the owners of the property at 7 Shandell. And the architect for the property is Scott Brown. You might have heard from him this evening. So if we go to the next slide, please, Andy. The Marrs are proposing to remove an existing structure and reconstruct a new single-family home. The structure was built around 1981. It's located in the R2 district. Scott's going to talk about some of the issues with the home in a minute. The lot is a corner lot with a radius, and that is why we're here. It's the only existing non-conformity is the rear setback of 14.8 feet, where 25 feet are required. However, what happened was in 2012, when the zoning changed and defined corner lot and the radius, that rear lot, that line that we're going to talk about, became a rear lot. Before, there was no rear lot line given the configuration of the lot we'll talk about in a minute. The proposal is to intensify the rear setback to 10.1 feet. Otherwise, the proposal and the lot meet all of the dimensional requirements. If you go to the next slide, please. So here you have it. It is actually a perfect pie. And in 1981, when this was created, the lot actually had no rear lot line. It had two side lot lines. And as you can see, at the time, the house would have met all of those dimensional requirements. In 2012, the City Council adopted a new definition of how you calculate rear lot lines on corner lots with radius or radii, if you will. And as a result, the lot opposite the longest calculation became the rear lot line. And that's where the 10.1 setback is on the proposed, and the 14.8 exists on the existing conditions. Otherwise, other than that, everything else on this proposal meets the dimensional requirements of the ordinance. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Scott to review his proposed plans.
Oh, thank you, Lisa. Scott Brown, the architect for the project. If we could just start with the site plan. Andy, thank you. So this project originally started out as a renovation project, and we were hoping for a project that didn't require any relief. You know, because in our minds, meaning myself and my clients, the Mars, certainly not the attorney or the planning office, because in our minds, it seemed like the lot line, which is shared with 9 Chandel, the property on the left there, was a side yard and not a rear yard requiring a larger setback, you know, thus triggering a special permit. So, you know, we were caught a little bit off guard by this, and this is just such a unique and oddly shaped lot. So despite being caught off guard, our scheme hasn't altered very much, because this is such an odd lot that there aren't many things that one can really do differently. You know, and as I mentioned, we were planning to renovate the house, but as the project evolved, it started to make more and more sense to start new. The tipping point, which made this a new construction project, was that, you know, my client, David Maher, who is in the drilling and well business, did a little experiment in his basement during a rain event. And what we learned from that is that the groundwater was only a foot away from the basement slab. And this wasn't what I would consider a significant rain event or a prolonged rain event. So that really sort of made us question what we were doing with regard to renovating this house. So we stepped back and we decided that we really needed to do the right thing here and put in a new foundation at a much higher height, to a height that was comfortably above that, you know, ground water level. So the new footprint that we are proposing here is more or less the same as it was when it was a renovation. You can see the grayed out house, existing house underneath the, you know, our proposed footprint there. And, you know, the only exception is like sort of a couple of bump outs on the back of the house. And if we could just go forward to the next elevation, Andy, or A2.1, the proposed front elevation, please. Here we go. So what we are proposing is a classic New England shingle style home. It's got a gambrel shaped roof line. It's 2 stories, just like most of the other houses in the neighborhood. And despite doing a new foundation and raising this is only 2 feet higher than the existing house, 2 feet higher to the median roof height, meaning, like, you know, that this house will still be in scale with the rest of the 2-story homes in the neighborhood. So we're planning to do a high quality project here. We've got, you know, white cedar sidewall shingles to weather, high quality aluminum clad, you know, wood windows, rot resistant trims that are intended to mimic real wood. And, we certainly hope that, everyone will see this as an excellent addition to the neighborhood. And with that, I'll hand it back to council. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Andy, if you could go down to slide 9, please. So of course, the test under section 9, B3B is whether or not there is a new nonconformity. And in this instance, there's not a new nonconformity. We are intensifying that rear nonconformity. But we're permitted to do that if the board finds that the proposed change will not be substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood than the pre-existing non-conforming structure. So here you see an aerial view of Shandell Drive, and right at the apex, you can see the existing structure and the neighboring structure. So if you can go to the next slide, Andy. All of these homes are built approximately the same area on the lot because the side lot lines are 10 feet, and that's what most of them are, but in addition to the exact neighboring structure. But you can see the kind of weird shape on this particular side of Shandell Drive. We believe that the proposal is not substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood than the existing non-conforming structure, with this small increase in that non-conformity, which still would meet the sideline setback at 10 feet if that's what it was. At the time the house was constructed, as you know, the definition of corner lot was different. And so now we have a rear lot there. The adjacent structure at 9 Shandell is also about 10 feet off the same lot line, so that it's not going to be any more detrimental there. And as Scott indicated, the house continues to be, same 2-story house that exists in the rest of the neighborhood. The result is that the applicant requests and that the board finds that the proposed reconstruction of this house is not substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood by increasing that now rear line setback slightly to 10.1. Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney Mead. We'll now take public comment. If there's anyone that would like to comment again on this application that's attending the meeting right now, please raise your hand at this time and wait to be recognized. Unmute if you have something to say. I believe there is a raised hand.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Stephanie Nikitich, 93 High Street. So my concern here is simply with the uniform application of our zoning. This application has been presented as an extension of an existing building in terms of the relief sought, and it's not. It is a brand new building. The applicants have chosen to remove the building and build a new building. And so I don't think it is an extension of a nonconformity. It is a new building with a new nonconformity. And so the relief being sought might be different. And I understand that the zoning administrator has presented this as not requiring that type of relief. But I also know from sitting through many zoning board meetings that the special permit granting authority can determine that the relief being sought needs to be different. And I just, it might be something that you would consider in this case, just for the integrity of our process and the uniformity of the way that we apply zoning. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Nikitich. Does anyone else have a comment? Please raise your hand. Seeing none, we'll close public comment and move on to Questions from the board, starting with Mr. Delisle.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Attorney Mead, could you indulge me and just run through this side yard, backyard
Sure,
situation once again for me? I'd appreciate that.
sure, I'm happy to. And at the same time, I'd like to address Ms. Nikitic's comment after I do that, if I could. If you could go to the site plan, Andy. So when this house was built, there was no definition of corner lot. So it only has 3 sides. And the two, let's call them the right angle lines, were considered the side yards. And the curvature was the entire front yard. But there's a definition change in 2012, which basically says you have to run where you have a radius and a corner, you have to run the sidelines out till they meet, and the longest one becomes the front yard. And so when the longest one becomes the front yard, the rear lot line is the one that's next to 9 Chandel in the rear. And that becomes the rear lot line. To address Ms. Nikitic's comments, she's actually incorrect. In the city of Newburyport and many other communities in Massachusetts, where you have a pre-existing non-conforming structure on a lot, and the building inspector or a zoning code enforcement officer in this case can permit you to remove that pre-existing non-conforming structure and rebuild it, and it's still non-conforming. It's called an alteration. And it has been happening in the city of Newburyport for, well, I've been doing this since 2004, and it happened before that. Happens in the town of Salisbury and many other communities. So that's not an unusual situation. And this is how the zoning has been interpreted for many years.
Thank you. So just that was informative. But backing up to the lot line between 9 Chandel. So that entire lot line from, I guess, sort of the street down to 5 Chandel, that is treated as the rear lot line.
That's correct.
The two, and those in this site plan, those dashed lines that go out beyond the arc, those are the lines that you're talking about, where the one that goes along Chandel, that longer of the 2 dashed lines becomes the front lot line, making the lot line between 9 Chandel and 7 Chandel the rear lot line.
That is correct. That's those dotted lines are the engineer's calculation to determine the front lot line.
Got it. Okay. That's helpful. And then what did we say the height was going to be on this versus the old height? I think Mr. Brown said it was 2 feet, but what were the actual data points?
The proposed structure is 24 feet. And I think if you maybe go the existing elevations, Andy, or on the
It would be in the
zoning
site plan.
table.
Yeah.
Do you have it, Scott?
It would be on the site plan if we could just zoom out.
But so the proposed is 24. So we're well under anything.
Yes.
So that's enough information for that. No, we don't need to pull that out. That's okay. All right, that's good for me. That's the only questions I have. Oh, thanks, Andy.
Thank you, Mr. Delisle. And then we have the measurements. Moving on, Ms. Webb, do you have any questions?
This is a very interesting application with the radius shape, the corner lot. Unique, I should say. And so I'm just looking at I don't really have any direct questions. The proposal was very thorough. In our staff report references a street tree, let's see, Okay, I guess we're waiting for confirmation from DPS that about the sidewalk doesn't need replacement. And the tree commission is recommending one large street tree to the east of the property towards 5 Shandell Drive.
Right, we'll comply with the street tree and sidewalk ordinance as required. That's not an issue.
Okay. No, I don't have any other questions. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Webb. Mr. Swanton.
The one abutter that's really affected here, that's close to this, what I guess we're calling the rear lot line, is the folks there at 9 Shandell. Have they commented positively or negatively in this process?
So I don't think there was any public comment tonight. And I believe Mr. Hazeltine might be on. And he has spoken to most of the neighbors who have no objection to the proposal. So if you want him to speak up, he can speak to that.
But that's all right. That's all right.
Okay.
That's all right. No, that's fine. I was going to ask a question about scale, but I walked around the neighborhood there, and I think this house, the one in front of it there, or to the bottom of this picture, is also quite large. So this one, it's not like the other one earlier in the agenda tonight that was very large for its neighborhood. So this is, and quite frankly, we're not supposed to comment on design, but I don't think it's a bad looking house either. So I have no other comments.
Thank you, Mr. Swanton. And compliments never hurt, I imagine. So, Mr. Chagnon, do you have any questions?
One question. I was curious, when we look at the old footprint and the new footprint, I'm assuming you're not using the old foundation. Is that true?
That is correct. This is an entirely new construction.
Yeah. So just out of curiosity, I mean, you could have put the house where you would have maintained the 14-foot setback that's there today. What's driving that extra 4 feet? I know there's a bump out, but bump outs can be moved.
It's really the size of the garage. The current garage there is rather narrow. I think it's maybe at 20 feet. And, what we're proposing here is slightly larger at 22 feet, which is what I would consider sort of a minimum size for a 2-car garage.
Yeah. Okay, Chair, I've got no other questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chagnon. Mr. Bennett, do you have any questions?
I have no questions on this one.
Okay. My question is to go back to the bump out that Mr. Chagnon brought up. So the attached garage is wider. I see that, but it's the actual little bump out off the side of the newly grown garage, for lack of a better word, because it's getting late.
Oh yeah, I mean, if we could just go to the front elevation, I
Yeah.
think what we're seeing there, on A2.1 front elevation, that's an additional bump out, which is really sort of a lean-to, a half bay or storage bay, as you will, for yard equipment, which is somewhat essential because the garage itself is very, very tight.
Okay.
That what we're seeing right there in the lower right-hand corner, that's that additional bump out.
Because that's really what's causing what is part of hitting that.
Part of it, correct, yes.
Okay. I have no further questions. So we will move on to deliberations, and remember that this is a special permit for nonconformities. And we need to structure any conversation, comments, deliberations as such. So as always, we kick it off with Mr. Delisle.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Again, this looks like a nice project. Clearly, there will be no addition of a new nonconformity here. And I think it looks like to me, and based on my knowledge of the Shandell neighborhood, that the change proposed here is detrimental to the neighborhood than what is currently there, even when taking into account massing and size and the structure and the lot. So I can support this project. I think this looks nice.
Thank you, Mr. Delisle. Ms. Webb?
I can support the project. Thank you.
Mr. Swanton?
I too can support the project. Thank you.
Mr. Chagnon?
Ditto.
Thank you. And you took my quote away. Between the dittos and Mr. Delisle's wonderful lead-off description, I would agree that I can support this project. So with that, I guess it's time to entertain a motion.
It's Rachel Webb. I'll make a motion to approve case number 2021-08, special permit for nonconformities for 7 Shandell Drive.
Mr. Shagnon, I'll second it.
Excellent. It's a motion to approve made by Ms. Webb, second by Mr. Chagnon. We now go to a vote. Mr. Delisle?
Yes.
Ms. Webb?
Yes.
Mr. Swanton?
Yes.
Mr. Chagnon?
Yes.
Mr. Moore is a yes. All in the affirmative. Application is approved.
Great. Thank you,
And
folks.
thank you. Our last public hearing tonight, moving on, is for 10 Riley Avenue. Application 2021-09, a special permit for nonconformities to remove pre-existing nonconforming single-family home and construct a single-family home in its place. Sounds oddly familiar. And it's from David and Brianne Matter with Lisa Mead. And when we hear from the applicant.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Lisa Mead, Mead, Tellerman, Costa, 30 Green Street, on behalf of the applicant. And with me this evening is Eileen Graff, who is the architect, and I believe David and Bree are also on the call this evening. So this is 10 Riley Avenue. It's in the R2 zoning district. If you can go to the next slide, please, Andy. The proposal is to demolish and reconstruct a single-family house at 10 Riley with a new attached garage. The property is non-conforming for lot area and frontage and front yard setback. The length of the front yard nonconformity will be reduced, but it will be intensified up in an upward vertical action. The property is proposed otherwise meets the other dimensional requirements of the ordinance. If you go to the next slide, please. So the property includes 9,236 square feet of area and 78.58 feet of frontage along Riley Avenue, very typical lot around there. The original house was constructed around 1957. If you go to the next slide, please. So as you can see, everything else is in conformance, and even the front yard setback is nominally non-conforming at 23.5 where 25 is required. And of course, we won't be doing anything with the frontage and lot area. If you go to the next slide, please. So here you can see the structure in the hash line underneath is the existing structure. And the front of this house at the 23.5 line is actually the garage. So we'll be taking the parking from the outside next to the neighbors into the garage. It has a little bit of living space above it, and Eileen will go over that in a minute. But aside from that, you can see it also is narrowed in its width and its nonconformity. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Eileen to review the elevations.
Thank you, Lisa. Could we, oh, thank you. These are the existing elevations of the existing structure. And then if we could flip to the floor plans of the proposed, that would be great. Thank you. So the design goals for Bree and David in this property was to create a single family home, a 3-bedroom with an attached garage. In order to and cited so that we maximize some of the benefits of the property, a lot of privacy on the backyard, etc., and really sort of expose the living space to that private backyard. So you can see on the first floor plan, it's taking, which is the left side of the drawing, it's taking advantage of exactly that. So we've created first floor open floor plan with kitchen, living, dining on the back of the property. As you move towards the front, as Lisa mentioned, that closest structure to the front setback is now the garage, and that garage space is actually entered from the side. So the driveway will come in and then bend to the right in order to access the garage space. So then between the garage and the living space is the sort of critical mudroom and powder room space in that I'll call it connector. And then if you look to the right, we've created all the bedroom sleeping spaces and the associated sort of bathrooms that go with it. So very standard in its layout, 2 floors, no attic space, and you can see from the square footage calcs on the left side there, we're at 3214 in square footage. And then if we scroll to an exterior elevation, I could walk through those. And here we go. This is the top elevation, is the elevation off of Riley. As we were mentioning, the garage is the structure to the right. And that's coming towards you in this sort of L-shaped configuration. And then further back is the sort of main body of the house with the front entry on the left. And then the bottom elevation is the back view to the property. You will see all those French doors on that ground level, and that's the kitchen, living, dining space, entering out into some covered porch area with an extended sort of larger area on the left side, which has more space for sort of outdoor living. And then the next elevation are the side views. So this would be as if your back is towards Beacon, looking towards, say, Marlborough. And you could see the side entry of the garages on the right side, sort of, again, it's L-shaped. So the left side of the structure, as you see it, is the piece that's closest to us in this view. And that's the master above with the living space below. And on the bottom drawing, the flip view, and this shows that covered space that I was referring to with the outdoor living. There's a fireplace there, and then as the sort of living space connects over to the garage, you could see that's the far left part of the structure. In general, if we maybe flip back to the front view, the material choices here, it will be traditional clapboards on a majority of the structure. Thank you. And then there's a sort of a banding, switching to a wider boarding on the lower level, creating a base. There will be a sort of a reduced second floor ceiling height as ways to minimize the building height. There are varying from 7 feet to 5 feet. The garage structure there is the top of wall is at 5 feet, with dormers popped in to just give a little bit more head height and light where needed. But this helps again to bring down the scale and the roof height. We've got some extended overhangs, some detail with some bracketing. There is a mixture of roofing materials. The main body of the roof would be architectural shingles, and then taking moments on the first floor level or the ground level with some one-story structures at the front entry for covered that could be covered in the metal roofs. Likewise on these one-story bumps at the garage, also opportunity for the metal roofs. So adding some detail to the textures and materials of the building to help give it a little accent and some high level finishes. All the windows are going to be casement style windows, some fixed, for basically as you see it, for light in different proportions. So the neighborhood definitely has a mix of styles ranging from capes to 2-story reproduction colonials, but we felt our design was somewhere sort of falling in between in regards to scale and to massing. And so again, the overall building height is lower, 26 feet with no intended third floor space. And then overall, I think that the house blends traditional New England in terms of form and in siding, with some unique design elements, playing with window proportions, the overhangs, and some curves. But with that, I'll let Lisa continue with the presentation, but I'm happy to answer and address any questions the board may have.
Thank you, Eileen. Andy, if you could go back up to the site plan, that would be great, or maybe the first photo that follows it. So I'd be remiss in talking a little bit about this house because it's very important to Bree. It's the yellow house in the middle. So Bree grew up in Newburyport. She's a Newburyport High grad and a fellow UMass alum. Met David and moved to California. This was her grandfather's house. And she told me a story which some of you may appreciate. I'm not sure how long all of you have been in Newburyport, but there used to be an family Italian restaurant down on State Street, Lower State Street, where Taylor Rental is, called Labadini's. And so she recalled walking in here every Friday night and smelling the Italian takeout from Labadini's to have dinner with her grandfather. So Bree is purchasing this house and moving back to Newburyport from the West Coast, which I think is a really awesome thing for a born and bred person to be able to do. So go to the next slide. And so this is the house right now. And I think it's important because you can see the mixture of houses around it. You go to the next slide. You can see the driveway outside. You see the houses across the street. Eileen was talking about the different architecture. We have a colonial, we have a gambrel, we have a cape and a half next door. You go next slide, please. Similarly, you can see the houses across the street here. Next slide, please. This is from the rear. And then this is towards Beacon. So you can see there again is a reproduction colonial over on Beacon Street. And similar, that's another view. So that's the rear of the house. And here's the front corner. You can see that cape with the story and a half next door. And I think we have one more. And then this is the front view again. So here again, the board has a two-step review. We're not creating any new nonconformities. And so the next question is whether or not change will be substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood than the pre-existing non-conforming structure. And in this instance, we believe that that is not the case, that the proposal is not substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood than the existing non-conforming structure. First, the non-conformity is shortened along the front lot line from 36 to 21 feet, while it's intensified in an upward extension. The applicant proposes to replace this single-family home with a new single-family home. The new home will continue to conform to all other dimensional setbacks, except for, of course, the lot area and frontage, which it has no control over. The new home will provide enclosed parking by relocating the parking that is adjacent to the neighboring property into the middle of the lot in the garage, which is a side entry garage. And the new home is more consistent in size with the other homes in the neighborhood. 4 of the 5 abutting homes directly around there are more than 1 story tall. The neighboring home to the north at 8 Riley is 1 3/4 stories. The neighboring home to the south at 40 Beacon is 2 stories. 11 Riley across the street is 2 stories, as is 7 Riley Avenue at 2 stories. And as Eileen showed earlier on the plans, the home is proposed at 26 feet in height, well under the 35-foot limit. Additionally, the house will have 60% open space on the lot once it's completed, where 40% is required. And we would also be remiss if I didn't say that the applicant has received 5 letters of support across the street at 7 and 11 Riley, beside it at 40 and 42 Beacon, and then behind it at 85 Marlborough. So it's interesting, the 85 Marlborough house property goes all the way to the back, to the rear of this property, which goes to the issue about the use of the backyard, which Eileen was talking about, the privacy back there. So with that, we believe the board can find that this proposal is not substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood than the existing non-conforming structure, and we'd request your approval.
Thank you, Attorney Mead, and thank you, Ms. Graff, for the explanation on the architectural design. With that presentation done, we now move to public comment. If there's anyone that wants to comment on the application that was just presented, please raise your hand electronically to be recognized. Seeing none, given that this is the end of the raising hand, I would hope everyone would be on board and be able to do that quickly. So I'm going to say that you're not seeing any public comment. So I'm going to close that portion and go to questions from the board, starting with Mr. Delisle.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. I don't have any questions on this one, so I'm going to pass.
Excellent. Ms. Webb? Rachel, can you hear us?
Sorry for the technical delay. I have no
worries.
questions.
It wouldn't be a Zoom meeting without it. It's not a problem. Mr. Swanton?
No, my colleagues already asked all my questions, so I have none.
Excellent. Even some humor late night. I like it. Mr. Chagnon?
No questions. Excellent presentation, very detailed and informative.
Mr. Bennett?
I have no questions.
Long distance, no questions. I have no questions. I wasn't sure the letters of support were going to get mentioned. So, and they were mentioned. So with questions from the board complete, we'll move on to deliberations again, starting with Mr. Delisle.
Thank you, Mr. Moore.
And remember, and I know you will do this, but I'll just say it that given that this is a special permit for nonconformities, we will construct our discussion around it, as I know you so expertly do.
I'm not going to do it this time. I'm gonna let someone else.
Okay. Fair enough.
No, as we've listened to the presentation, I think we can all take away the fact that there will be no new nonconformities here. And I think that in my opinion, the changes proposed by the applicant will not be substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood than what currently exists. I think that, you know, that this is a nice design. It's an update on the property and the neighborhood on Riley. There are quite a mix of different housing types. So I think this will fit in quite nicely. And lastly, I will just say that for the record, I played on the baseball team for Labadini, so I understand what the applicant must have enjoyed when she went to see her grandfather. So that's excellent.
Excellent. Excellent. Ms. Webb?
I can support this application. I concur with Mr. Delisle's comments.
Excellent. Mr. Swanton?
Yes, I too I concur.
Mr. Chagnon?
Agreed. Nice house design, great improvement for the neighborhood. Definitely not more detrimental. This poor little house just needs some love. So great design. I can support it.
Excellent. And I will agree with all my colleagues' statements, except that I did not play for the baseball team. So with that, we'll entertain a motion.
Oh, it's Rachel Webb.
I'll go ahead. You go ahead, Rachel. It'll be your last one.
Thanks. Right. All right. Yes, I make a motion to approve ZBA case docket number 2021-09 for 10 Riley Ave, special permit for nonconformities.
And I will second that. This is Mr. Delisle.
All right, we have a motion made by Ms. Webb, seconded by Mr. Delisle, and to approve 2021-09. So I will now go to a vote. Mr. Delisle?
Yes.
Ms. Webb?
Yes.
Mr. Swanton?
Yes.
Mr. Chagnon?
Yes.
Mr. Moore says yes as well. All in the affirmative. The application is approved. Thank you very much. And well done, Ms. Webb. It's the way to go out. At this point, this concludes the public hearings on our agenda. So I will close that portion of the meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll move on now to the business meeting, starting off with the approval of the minutes from 2/23/21. Do we have any comments from board members?
Yeah, I actually have two very little things.
Okay.
Just on page 3 and the second to last paragraph, which starts out Stephanie Nikitic. In the second line, the proposed structure should smaller. It's missing a verb, should be smaller. Just add the word be. The proposed structures should be smaller and simpler. And finally, on the next page, the first down the bottom, there's 2 paragraphs to start with Mr. Swanton. The first one of those 2, like the 4th line, he asked how this scale and missing is sensitive to the neighborhood. I think it's scale and massing, so just change missing to massing. That's all I have.
Excellent. Changes duly noted. Does anyone else have any additions, edits, comments on the minutes before we look for an approval?
I move we approve them. This is Ken Swanton, as amended.
All right. We have a motion to approve. Do we have a second?
Bud Shagnon, second.
All right, motion to approve the minutes by Mr. Swanton, seconded as amended, and then seconded by Mr. Chagnon. We go to a vote now. Mr. Delisle?
Yes.
Ms. Webb?
I'm going to pass as I did not have the opportunity to read them.
Excellent. Duly noted. Mr. Swanton?
Yes.
Mr. Chagnon?
Yes.
And Mr. Moore, yes. That's 4 in the affirmative, 1 abstention. And the minutes are adopted as amended or approved as amended. Next on the business meeting agenda is a discussion with Andy Port, the PIA development restrictions, permitting, etc. As promised, this would be well done and brief, so we'll hold him to it.
Yeah.
And do you want to take the floor?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I will keep it very brief. I know it's late this evening. Just brief, the Zoning Board of Appeals has been over the years looking at projects on Plum Island as well as other areas of the city, of course. We've seen some increases in sizes of structures on the island. Part of that actually stems from a zoning amendment that was adopted. We're looking back through our records, but there was a zoning amendment adopted in 2011, 2011, that made a change from the need to get a variance for certain increases to lowering the bar to needing only a special permit for nonconformities, or a special permit for that threshold. So, you know, folks have basically an easier time in some cases on Plum Island of getting expansions or doing things where on the mainland something would require a variance. I think that's a lot of folks don't necessarily understand that about the Plum Island overlay district. But there was some recent discussion at the city council. The reason I mention this is because there was some recent discussion at the city council. There was initially, there were 2 proposals that were submitted to the city council for consideration that would have affected what types of development or expansion could happen on Plum Island. And I'm just going to give you a quick update on the status of those, just so you understand in context as you're thinking about your applications, or whether or not you think any changes to the zoning regulations would be beneficial. The first one had to do with Conservation Commission regulations. And I believe that my understanding anyway is that is in the council's city council subcommittee for review, and that it's probably going to be staying there for some time. I believe until possibly the fall, to at least allow further discussion of what we're going to see in a study that was initiated by the town of Newbury to look at the sea level rise and flooding conditions on the island going forward. So in the coming months, there's going to be a series of meetings. We're still waiting for details on the dates from the consultant working for Newbury, but in essence, there'll be a couple of meetings to present the updated flood maps and talk a little bit about the fiscal implications of sea level rise for the island in particular, given that it's the most vulnerable area of the city. So that is going to be panning out. And so that brings me to circle back on the ordinances again. There's one that is related to Conservation Commission regulations. And I said that's in committee and it's probably expected to stay there for the coming months to let that process of looking at the maps unfold before anybody considers changes to the regulations. Again, that's not my ordinance change, but that's my understanding of that, where that stands. There was a zoning amendment change to the Plum Island Overlay District, which your board administers typically for special purpose, not for expansions and modifications, as you've seen tonight and other nights. And the essence of that proposal was to prohibit further growth or expansion of structures that are out there. So things like new bedrooms beyond those that are already there today. Or additional square footage or additional horizontal construction within the flood hazard zones, because a good area of the island is in flood hazard zones and will be in worsening conditions in the future based on the maps we're getting from the consulting engineers. So the bottom line is that proposal was brought forward to look at whether or not we should be curbing the growth in the island rather than what's happening, which is there's been sort of a ballooning of growth on the island. And whether or not that's in the city's best interest or the neighborhood's best interest, because all of that public and private infrastructure is effectively going to be in hazard's way, more so than it is today. So at any rate, that zoning proposal got withdrawn completely. So that's no longer in the council's docket. I wouldn't expect there to be any other revisiting of that zoning change or one like that for Plum Island for the remainder of this year. But again, I think that public process that's going to be unfolding with the consultants initiated by the town of Newbury to look at the maps in this municipal vulnerability preparedness grant, I think that'll be worthwhile for folks to track that and participate. So we can let you know when we have more specific dates. We can send you the link to the meeting. I suspect we'll be posting on our city calendar. But it's a meeting that's being set up by this project that was initiated by the town of Newbury to look at the new maps and talk about the fiscal implications of the changing conditions on the island and the worsening flooding and inundation that will happen in different areas, not just the one or two spots. So at any rate, I just wanted to update you on the status of those two particular code changes, one of which had to do with the Plum Island Overlay District, mainly because there was discussion in the past about whether or not changes in the language were necessary or beneficial or desired in any way to clarify the extent to which the city council wants to enable or not enable growth or development on the island beyond what is there today. So there were discussions of other miscellaneous details related to that, but that item is not active. So there's no further discussion happening of that. The conservation one, like I said, is in committee of the city council, but I'm not expecting any substantive action on that, that it would remain in committee for the coming months. So just an update on that I thought was worth your while.
I appreciate that, Andy. And I know that the link to the study that was last week that was recorded, I found it really informative. So I know there's going to be more details of that as you just explained. So something we'll certainly all, I'm sure, keep an eye on and stay on top of as we go forward. Is there anything else?
No, thanks for the moment to update you on that.
You bet. Thanks, Andy. And before we go any further, I just want to say, given that this is Rachel's last night, I just want to thank her for her dedicated service on the ZBA over the last couple of years. And we're going to miss her attention to detail and thoughtful, constructive comments on all these cases. So hate to see you go, but congratulations on the new job.
Thank you very much. Andy, I wanted to ask you, as I may have mentioned, I was on that Plum Island Sea Level Rise Advisory Committee as the zoning board designee, and I would hope that someone else might step up to fill the position. So
yes, thank you, Rachel, for doing that while you were here. And as Rachel mentioned, if there's any ability, given the the board, this board, more so than say the planning board in Newburyport, is looking at projects on the island in the Plum Island Overlay District. You're the ones that are getting triggered for review for special permits and whatnot. That it'd be beneficial to have someone from this board as a stakeholder in that discussion. So if there's someone that can, fill that seat where Rachel's leaving, that's great. If not, obviously, we'll keep in touch with you and let you know where that's going. But we thought it'd be helpful mainly because this project is not talking about regulatory changes. It's presenting the information, but it's useful to help frame the type of questions that people will ask or the type of information that should be displayed, to have input from, planning from ZBA members, residents on the island they have in the group and so forth. So
They meet like about once a month or so. It's during the day, like 12 to 2:30. So
yeah, and their
that was the
project
tough
is
part.
expected to be completed by June. So it's not a year-long, obligation either per se.
All right, that's a good heads up. That's a job opening, apparel, volunteer job opening. So if anyone has an inkling, we know it definitely is something that might behoove us to have a mole on the inside and know what's going on there. And that's Andy said she had questions, so thanks very much. All right, with that said, that concludes the business of today's agenda for March 9th, 2021, and entertain a motion to close. We'll do this by voice. All in favor?
Aye.
Yay.
All opposed? The ayes have it. Meeting is adjourned.
Bye, Rachel.
So long.
Bye, Rachel. Thanks.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
Bye.
Good luck,
Bye.
Rachel.
Thank you.